If this encounter chilled your spine, help us reach more seekers of the unseen. Like, subscribe, and share your voice in the comments. But we want more. We're searching for the truth in the darkness. If you've witnessed something inexplicable in the deep woods, a cryptid that shouldn't exist, a wendigo's piercing cry echoing through the pines, a shadow that moved wrong, an impossible creature that shattered everything you thought you knew, don't stay silent. Share your story with us. Your testimony matters. The woods are watching, and your words could be the proof the world needs. My possible Bigfoot encounter. This happened I want to say January of 2025 or maybe December 2024. I can't remember. But it was when there was a lot of snow. I live in Vaughan, Ontario, Canada, to be specific, and my mom and I were driving to this therapy appointment. Although it is not crucial to the story, I want to mention that while we were driving, we passed through a massive forest. Keep in mind there were many other cars, so it wasn't just us. I looked to my right and saw a massive field covered in snow with a cluster of giant trees behind it. As I observed the field, I noticed large footprints. I don't have a picture of them since we were driving so fast, but this was not like a deer. These were not hoof prints. I couldn't tell if these were paw prints either, but all I could tell you is these were some big footprints, like massive ones. Again, I couldn't tell if they were from boots or from some animal. Keep in mind that the road we were driving on, which runs alongside this field, was busy, and the footprints were not present during the many times we drove by, so they were likely left during the night. What do you guys think, Bigfoot or something else? Did I mention that the sighting was literally right next to the Cryptid Conservation Center, which is in Vaughan, Ontario? And while I've speculated that Bigfoot could be hiding in the forest at the center, I don't think Bigfoot could hide in the forest for very long, maybe like a passing individual taking refuge. And are there any reports of Bigfoot being in Vaughan, Ontario, like sightings, footprints, or howls? My story, tell me what you think. I've struggled with this story for years, mostly because I just could not believe what the duck I saw. I was never too superstitious, but I'd be lying if I said I've never had any encounters with unexplainable things. And this one hits the top of the list. You don't have to believe me, folks, but good Lord, am I being honest. I was camping with my Boy Scout troop in Alpine, New Jersey. When I was in early 8th grade, November of 2010, I stepped out of the cabin in the middle of the night to relieve myself and went out and did my business. I stood outside for a second, taking in the campsite. I was standing by a picnic table and glanced around. The moon was so bright that it made the sky look dark blue rather than black, and there was a light fog ominously cascading along the campsite. I heard a rustling in some bushes and didn't think much of it at first, but it continued and got louder. Slowly, I moved my flashlight along until I got to the source of the noise as it got louder and louder. I looked over and saw something that I still don't quite understand, to be honest. This thing was gigantic. Standing on hind legs, he was tall and had a muscular body with fur that looked to be black/dark gray. He had the head of a dog/wolf, only thicker, and the weirdest part? Yellow eyes. I stared at him, and he stared at me, and then he just vanished, ran away faster than I could even blink. I was so bewildered that I blacked out for a minute and had to sit down. But I went back to the cabin and tried to go back to sleep. I managed to block it out of my mind for a while. Repressed memories is the term, I believe, but it eventually resurfaced when I watched an episode of Monster Quest about werewolves. This doesn't really bother me anymore, truthfully. I actually think it was pretty damn cool. Almost like the setting for a perfect horror movie, LOL. The funny thing is, I feel like this thing didn't want to see me any more than I wanted to see him. It's as if we looked at each other and just silently agreed to say nothing, leave each other alone, and then act like all this shit never happened. I personally don't buy into all that transformation, bark at the moon bullshit. I think werewolves are more of an undiscovered species. I stayed with the troop for a while after making Eagle to help mentor some younger scouts, and while I'll always be known as the fun leader, probably due to being closer in age, I still always stress to them that the buddy system is mandatory at all times. My night could have been very different if the wolf-like creature I encountered had been more confrontational. Lockridge Monster. On a night in late October 1975, farmer Herb Pfeiffer saw a four-legged, black-haired thing in the cornfield near Lockridge, Iowa, as he drove his tractor to his turkey pens, according to an article in the Milwaukee Sentinel. At first, Herb didn't tell anyone about the creature he saw in his tractor lights because, according to his wife, he thought we would make fun of him. Then Herb discovered he wasn't alone. Local man Lowell Adkins was hunting when he discovered 1 0-inch tracks near the remains of 4 slaughtered and partly eaten turkeys. People thought the tracks might have been those of a black bear, although the last recorded bear sighting in Iowa was at Spirit Lake in 1876, according to the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. Although bear sightings have increased recently, in 1975 they were largely unheard of. Word of a bear loose in Jefferson County kept people in their homes after dark, but further reports made them wonder about going outside at all. Lockridge resident Gloria Olson spotted the beast one night, and she knew it wasn't a bear. It was just before dark, and I was driving past an old deserted farmyard when I saw it, Olson told reporters. To me, it looked as if it had a monkey's face and kind of had hair all over, so the Lockridge monster is still a mystery. I have been lurking here for a while, and after listening to these accounts, I felt like I had to tell you my weird ducking story. I swear to God, this is a real ducking story. I still get the chills. This was about 15 years ago in northern NJ. A friend and I were riding our bikes from his house to mine. It was probably 9:3 to 10 p.m. in the summer, so it was pitch black when we were coming down the road. He only lived 4 houses down from me, so it was only about 1,500 feet from his house to mine. In front of my house is a swamp, according to the legal deed of my parents' house, and across the road on the other side is a swamp as well. We were approximately 200 feet from my driveway right before the swamp begins, and this thing came out of the swamp about 50 to 70 feet in front of us. It was tall, say 6 at least, with long, lanky legs and long arms that looked like they could almost touch the ground. I don't know if it had hair or fur. I wasn't close enough to it. And the road was basically pitch black except for the light from neighboring houses. It walked on its back legs and lumbered out of the swamp, occasionally using its front legs to assist in running. But it was definitely a 2-legged creature that moved primarily on its rear legs. Anyway, this thing comes out of the swamp and goes to the middle of the street, turns to us and makes this weird, blood-curdling scream, growl, or hiss, a sound I wish I had on tape because I cannot duplicate it. After it makes this noise, it runs across the street and into the other swamps or woods. Well, my friend and I almost shit our pants where we stood, U-turned our bikes, and hightailed it the hell out of there. It took us a few minutes to recoup our thoughts and analyze what the duck just happened. After a few minutes, we agreed that we both saw the same thing but had no idea what the duck just happened. After regaining our courage, we bolted back down the road to my house. Since that day, I have never seen or heard the thing again. And for the record, we were both 100% sober, too young to be doing drugs or alcohol. So yeah, that's my weird ducking story. Let me know what you think. Thanks. A story from an acquaintance. So a guy I once knew told me a story about his personal Dogman sighting. He was a kid in either the 70s or 80s. And I believe he mentioned being in Texas, although he did not specify the exact town or city. He told me that there was a warning issued regarding disappearances in the area. Apparently some folks disappeared. One night he was playing outside, waiting for his babysitter to get back from the store just down the road, when he dropped the ball he was playing with and it rolled into a nearby alley. Being just a kid, he went to go grab it when he saw something. He just described it as very dog-like, but just wrong. Patchy fur and a face that just didn't look right, like a face stretched over a skull not meant for it. Eating something that he only said looked bloody, he initially thought it was just a sick dog until it suddenly stood on two legs. Understandably, he panicked and quickly ran away. He said he heard it running behind him, but he didn't bother looking back, just barely managing to make it to the house, closing and locking the door. Apparently, he heard it scratching and barking, though he said it sounded almost human. Apparently, eventually it left. Apparently, his babysitter never returned, disappearing. Personally, it sounds just like he was trying to tell me a spooky story, probably just a sick dog, but he swore it was real no matter what. I decided to share it. Maybe there is some truth to it, Help with figuring out a creature I saw one time a while ago. Can anyone help with an odd sighting I saw a few years ago? Okay. So 5 years ago, I was at my cousin's house for Thanksgiving. And let me preface this by saying they live on a very big hill / very small mountain in South Carolina. My cousin and I were walking down the hill into the woods. It was close enough to the house for us to see it. And it was about 2 p.m., roughly, because that's our normal time for Thanksgiving gatherings. So we were walking down the mountain, and we stopped to do something. I do not remember what we were looking at, but it was completely silent. And then suddenly I heard a very, very loud gust of wind and extremely loud stomping, like louder than a 500-pound man running through the forest. So I turned and saw, about 80-ish feet away, a glimpse of a white / beige, butter-colored furred thing on all fours. It sprints extremely loudly parallel to us and goes between some trees, and then it's dead silent again. The fur was long, like a long-haired dog's fur. It's hard to describe truthfully, but you can look up sheepdog for a good example. Anyways, I get scared, and my cousin and I run up the mountain to the house, and I ask him if he saw it too. And he says he did, but he didn't react much or act like it bothered him at all. Part of me suspects he thinks I'm making it up, and he is just playing along. Their family commonly makes up or exaggerates stories. Later, about an hour after our initial visit, we returned to that spot. But my recollection is unclear because I can't distinguish between my actual memories and the fabricated ones that my mind may have created. But where we were standing earlier in the story, there was what appeared to be a print in a bare spot of the ground. The leaves were moved. I don't fully remember what it looked like, but I remember thinking it was similar to a bear claw, but different. I think it had 6 toes instead of 5 and a thumb like one. It was quite round too, like a paw. Take that all with a grain of salt. Though the print memory is fuzzy. What could this be? My initial thought is a polar bear with some disability, but they don't live here. Then I thought it could be an albino bear, but my cousins watched the bear and they would have seen it again. Plus it was dirty beige / white, not pure albino white. Plus the sound randomly starting and stopping is ducking weird. I'm at a loss. Strange ape creatures outside years ago. Around 2010, I was sitting in my second-floor room at night on my computer, minding my business. I hear this strange hooting sound coming from outside, so I get up and look out the window. I saw these very strange creatures across the road, around 80 feet away. They were these ape-like creatures, about the size of a large dog, standing on their hind legs, but hunched over with their front legs / arms, not quite touching the ground, like a gorilla might look. They had dark fur and long tails too, like a monkey. There were 4 total. 2 were fighting, and 2 were watching the others as they scampered around. They screeched and hollered for about 5 minutes before they suddenly stopped and ran off at full tilt in a pack. Since that day, I have not seen those creatures again, nor have I heard of anything similar to what I witnessed. My mother, however, a few months later, said she saw the same strange creatures in broad daylight. They were crossing the road together, but seemed intelligent, she said, as one of them was carefully watching and waiting for the other to cross. These events all took place around Delta, BC. Has anyone seen or heard of these strange animals, or anything that might be remotely similar? Some background first. In high school, my best friend and I engaged in the quintessential cliché of sacrificing our souls for the sake of rock and roll. We had a little shed we called the Maggot Shack behind my house that we used as both a band practice room and party central. The ritual we found involved writing out what we wanted in exchange for our souls, signing our names in blood, then burning the writ in the flame of a black candle. We did get exponentially better at guitar pretty quickly, but I thought it was just a mental thing. That is, until a few weeks later. It was shortly after dark, likely around 9:30 to 10 p.m., and we were enjoying some marijuana and a few beers. My grandpa didn't mind if we had a few of his, so we were both making the trip up to the house. It was up a little hill and past a fence. We may have been a little buzzed, but I know for a fact that we left the light on and closed the door behind us. My grandpa had goats that would wander in if we left it open. And we were both already aware that our area was a hotbed for creepy happenings, so we wouldn't have wanted to come back to a dark room. Once we got the beers and opened up the back door to go back down to the shack, we immediately noticed that the lights were off and the door was wide open. I rationalized it by thinking that maybe the circuit breaker flipped because it was a really old place and it was a wonder the power out there worked at all. I went in the house and flipped it a couple of times with no results. It was odd, but we were jamming, so we hopped the fence and went down the hill. As soon as we got close to the door, we heard what I can only describe as a cross between a huge dog snarling and the angriest guttural scream that I've ever heard. It was easily as loud as one of our amplifiers maxed out. My stomach felt like I was going down an elevator at Mach 3, and my heart definitely skipped a beat or two. We ran so fast I almost fell, hopped the fence in a single bound, and were back inside my house in the span of probably 3 seconds. Thankfully, we never encountered that entity again, assuming it even had a corporeal form. My grandpa and I heard some really weird voice that was goat-like but whispering outside of my window one time a year or two after this, but as creatures go, that's all I've got. The figure. Today I am sharing an experience from my past. I was around 11 or 12 around the time this happened, and it occurred in the region of Central Texas. If you guys have ever seen this figure or something similar, I'd love to hear your stories. All right, so it was during early spring, if I remember correctly. The sun was starting to set early as usual, and was walking home from my buddy Jeffrey's house. When I was walking, I saw not a single soul in sight, and with only a single working streetlight on my road, I hurried home as fast as possible. Upon passing around 5 houses, I felt a shiver creep down my spine and my hair rise. It felt as if something was watching me, burrowing into my being with their eyes. Upon the shiver, I turned full circle, only to see a figure gray as molding clay at around 7 or 8 feet in stature. Its eyes were deep black sockets, and its mouth was as dark as a black hole. Its arms were skinny as twigs, followed by hands more resembling stumps than human fingers. There also seemed to be an item around its neck. I forgot what exactly it was, so I'm going to guess it was like a piece of black tattered cloth. I let out a small yelp and ran as fast as I ever did in my life. In the distance, I swore I heard small thumps following me. By the time I got to my house, I swung the door open and bolted the 3 locks on the door shut. I remember a thump on the door among the likes of a dead corpse hitting the ground. However, after that initial thump at the door, I glanced out the window to find nothing there, as if the monster had vanished into the cloaked darkness around it. Two years ago, I was camping in northern Vermont. There were about 6 miles of deep woods between me and the nearest town. 2 nights in, I was settling in for the night and was sitting at my fire cooking dinner, and I heard heavy footsteps to my left from the brush. I started to speak because I thought it was probably a bear, and I figured it would run off when it realized I was there. As soon as I started speaking, the footsteps stopped. I had never heard the forest so silent as when I did that night. It was at this point where I started to get nervous. I remember thinking that maybe it was some woods rat all hopped up on drugs and he could easily overpower me. Then I heard the footsteps loudly and clearly, and they got quieter and quieter. And then everything was normal again. Crickets started chirping again, and my feeling of dread diminished. The next morning I walked over to where I heard the noises and saw broken twigs and trampled leaves leading away from my tent. I actually decided to follow them as far as possible. I probably followed the trail for about half of a mile before I lost it. I headed back to camp and tried to rack my brain for an explanation. I assumed it was just some weirdo in the woods, at least until the next night. That night I was up late reading by lantern light, and I heard a twig snap directly to my left. I shined my light in the direction I heard it, and the beam landed right on a face. It resembled some kind of ape, but was more human-like. It had big eyes and hair around the edges. Its entire face was smooth-looking and tan-skinned. This thing was probably less than 20 feet away from me, and it looked at me for close to minutes before turning away and fleeing. That day, I believed the story of Bigfoot. When I returned, I attempted to share my experience with friends and family, but most of them dismissed me as crazy, except for my grandfather. My grandfather spent all his life in the woods up north and told me that he used to see them as a kid. I still think I got the clearest look out of most people at this thing's face. I could see a real emotion in its eyes, and it almost seemed curious. It changed my way of seeing the world, and I'm not so quick to shoot down accounts of unknown animals now. Creature in my barn. Tacoma, Washington, 1999. We lived on a dairy farm in Tacoma, Washington. We also had lived next to a military base. I was around 8 or 9, sometime in 1999 or 2000. As a kid, I grew up around cows and calves. I had a big heart for them. Well, one night, I heard some of the calves crying. I got up and left my house very quietly. I was not trying to get in trouble with my parents. The dairy farm was about 500 feet from my home. Time was about 2 a.m. Everyone was asleep. I arrived with the calves first. I fed them some grains. Next, I went to check on the cows. As I arrived, I didn't see anything unusual. Just some of them looked impatient. They would pass back and forth in a small space. Nearly all the cows knew me, so getting very close with them was no problem. I then started to feed them the grains as well, but they really didn't have an interest in the food. Their eyes were wide open, like they were terrified and scared. The more I noticed them pacing back and forth, and the more I noticed them all cramming to one side of the building, I kind of started to feel scared myself. I saw they were all avoiding the other side of the building. I took a few steps forward to see if maybe there was a dead cow in there. No dead cow. Then a weird feeling of being watched came upon me. I stopped looking at the cows' beds and looked at the end of the hall. At first glance, I thought I was seeing a tree. Then I realized there were no trees at the end of the hall. I had seen only half of a 4-gray, greenish-black alien. The head definitely was bigger than the body. The eyes are almond-shaped and slanted. It had been looking or analyzing me. My feet said run, but I couldn't run. I felt like I was moving in slow motion. I couldn't yell or talk. In a very slow way, That thing was hiding away from me behind the wall. Finally, I ran home terrified, but as soon as I opened the door, I knew I had to be very quiet, or else my parents were going to get the belt out. They were very strict. I tippy-toed back inside my room with my siblings. I had never told anyone about that night until now. I'm 26 years old now. I get constant thoughts about that night more and more now. I need help identifying a creature I saw as a child. So, straight to the point, I clearly saw two strange creatures. They were so clear you could mistake them for real people if it weren't for their facial features. Both had a male human body with average height and weight. They wore black suits and both carried a black briefcase. But their heads were not human. One of them had a whole silver fish sideways instead of a head, and the other had a hammerhead shark head. They were not wearing hats, masks, or anything. It was clearly real, not humans wearing costumes. They were standing in front of my wardrobe, doing absolutely nothing but stare at me. I don't remember how they appeared or how they disappeared. The only thing I remember is that they were standing there and I was terrified of them. Over a decade after I'd seen those creatures, a cartoon was released, the one about a salaryman with a fish head wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase. At that moment, when I found out about this cartoon, I was in absolute shock. It was almost the exact same thing I had seen 10+ years prior. That's what makes me believe what I saw back then was indeed a real creature. I mean, I was a kid, it could have been just my imagination, but it's too much of a coincidence for someone to release a cartoon featuring the same creature I saw. I've searched extensively for similar cryptids, stories, theories, and myths that could relate to this creature, but I haven't found anything at all. The only thing I know is that there are a few other cartoons featuring characters with various animal heads and human bodies wearing suits. That's why I decided to give it a last chance and try asking for any clues or theories. So, does anyone know what the heck I saw as a kid? Is there any cryptid that could look like this? I've been trying to figure out what I witnessed for about 20+ years now. My skunk ape encounter. So I was staying in a cabin in the middle of a swamp in South Carolina. It's somewhere around 10 p.m., and the swamp is a flooded cypress forest along the Pledge River. I do a tree knock to see if I could get a response, and I get a response back from around 100 yards away. Then around 15 minutes later, I heard water moving in a swoosh sound, like something was moving towards me so it could get a better view. I did not see it, but it sounded like something big, like a skunk ape, and the wind was moving away from me, so I could not smell it. I think it was watching, but I could not see or smell it, but I felt its dark energy. Later, I had an unidentified aerial phenomenon encounter with just a moving light, like a drone, and I shined a flashlight at it, and it disappeared. What did I see? In 2020, a friend and I were driving through a suburb in southern Maine, where we're both from. It was around 2 in the morning, and we were on a residential street that's usually populated during the day when, from the outer edge of the headlights, I began to see the feet and legs of what were revealed to be several wolves, at least 10. As we get closer, the wolves change shape and grow taller and thinner until they are all deer standing in the middle of the road, staring at us fearlessly as the truck comes to a stop in front of them. I decide they must have always been deer and the light was playing a trick on me, and after a moment the deer walk off the road and we continue driving. My friend looks to me and says, "That's so strange." I could have sworn that was a pack of wolves, but I watched them transform into deer. I explained to him what I saw, and we couldn't figure out what had actually happened. As far as I know, there are no wolves in southern Maine, and if they were, they wouldn't be hanging out in the suburbs. Does this story sound familiar to anyone? I've been thinking about it a lot lately and listening to different cryptids to compare experiences since I found this community today. Is this some kind of known phenomenon? Was this a not deer situation? Weird encounter at park. So I want to first preface that I don't know much about skinwalkers and other creatures of similar nature. I recently started learning of their potential existence, so I feel I'm willing to learn and be educated on the topic. There's this park my GF and I go to smoke a lot. And we've encountered the same dog-like thing multiple times. It's always nighttime when we go. It looks like a really huge black dog with round bear-like ears and yellowish eyes. The first few times we saw it, we didn't think much of it, but it kept coming back, like spawning in. It never made a sound and always just stared at us and followed us around creepily. We've encountered it while high and while sober on multiple occasions. So we stopped going to that park entirely. We would be walking from the parking lot to the park. And we just see the thing emerge from behind a tree and follow us and try to block our path back to the car. We had to run and jump a fence just to get away from it once, too. We've never had a single insanely creepy interaction. Besides the time we were at the deepest corner of the park bordering a small forest and had to jump 2 fences to avoid the thing. I have a theory it could be a stray, but it really did not act like a dog at all. It didn't really even feel alive. It felt like it was just monitoring us for some reason, but it was really eerie. Vancouver Island Dogman. I know firsthand encounters are what people want, but I've been holding on to this story for a while, and I just thought I'd share it to see if anyone else has stories from the region. About 20 years ago, I worked in this small rural community called Cedar by the Sea on Vancouver Island. Back then it was more like a collection of homes and a few businesses, mostly acreages, sheep farms, a trailer park, a pub, and a general store. Everything was pretty spread out, but not too far from the highway or other towns. Definitely rural, though, no street lights or anything, lots of wooded areas and lots of sheep farms in the area. One day I came to work and my coworker told me this story. The night before, she had planned to meet a friend to attend a party together. They both lived on rural properties and arranged to meet at the end of the road where we worked after her shift. As my friend was walking to this meeting point, around 9 p.m., she heard a large animal walking beside her on the other side of the barbed wire fence, where there were normally sheep grazing. What I found particularly unsettling was that this mysterious animal was matching her pace. If she sped up, the animal sped up. If she stopped, it stopped, etc. She couldn't see what it was, but she started to get freaked out. So when she saw her friend's truck, she took off running to get to it. The animal took off running too and continued to keep pace alongside of her. She reached the truck and her friend swung the door open so she could jump inside. Then, according to the story, the animal ripped the front bumper off of the truck and disappeared. No one saw what it was. During that time, the only large predators in that area would have been cougars and black bears. Wolves are a very unlikely possibility. They were extirpated from the island until very recently, although I guess there could have been some no one knew about. Grizzlies are very rare on the island and haven't been documented in that area ever. No coyotes live here. It would be very unusual for a cougar to act like that. They are usually silent ambush attackers, and I have never heard of them damaging or attacking vehicles. I have heard of black bears damaging vehicles to try to get at food, so I guess that's the most likely explanation, although it's still very strange for a black bear. Predatory black bear attacks in general are also pretty unusual. There have been a lot of Sasquatch sightings on the island, and First Nations here have wild man/wild woman stories, but to my knowledge, no werewolf or dogman stories. A lot of the stories I've heard about Dogman include the part about keeping pace. This seems very consistent with Dogman reports. I haven't come across other wild predators exhibiting this behavior. Typically, they only attack when they can overtake you, if they have decided to attack. Anyway, I never saw the car or stayed in touch with that coworker. I recall her being a pretty chill, straightforward person, not the kind to make up stories or seek attention. It's just stuck with me a long time, so I'm sharing to see if there are any similar accounts. The creature. I've never really been a believer in the paranormal, and I always try to find a rational explanation for things that I have trouble working out, at least until last summer. Originally from New Jersey, I decided to take my wife and kids for a vacation. We went to visit my in-laws, who have a cabin in the Canadian Rockies. For the first few days, we relished the peace and tranquility of the countryside, embarking on numerous hikes and bike rides in the forests surrounding the cabin. During these excursions, I observed nothing unusual within a 20-mile radius of the home. The cabin is pretty old and runs on a separate generator near the tool shed in the back of the yard, which my father-in-law says has always been temperamental and can create an eerie atmosphere when the lights flicker on and off. So I know better than to be spooked by shadows and bumps in the night. However, one night around 10 p.m., we were sitting around about to go to bed when the lights completely gave out, and the pitch blackness of the countryside meant that we could see literally nothing. Before I could grab the flashlight, I heard rustling outside the cabin, and something brushed the side of the wall by the living room. I tried to put on a brave face for my kids and told them that it was probably a coyote and they should just go to their room, although from the noises it made, it sounded bipedal and quite a bit bigger. Pretty creeped out, I grabbed my flashlight and headed out to the generator, shining the light on the ground to find my way. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that terrified me so much. I don't know if I can even find the right words to describe it. I couldn't make it out exactly. All I could see was a creature in my peripheral vision. It looked human and was about 6 feet tall with ghostly white skin. I knew it was staring at me. At this point, I was mustering up the courage to look at it. And when I shined the torch at it, I got a good look at the monster. It's so difficult to portray with words, but it looked like a man whose skin was too tight for his body. You could see all of his organs through his skin, and the bones made it look almost like an insect, with the lower arm extending further up the arm and the shin bones doing the same. But what jolted me the most was the fact that it had no face whatsoever, but still had indentations where the eyes should be. The bright light startled the creature, and it hunched over as if about to run. This was all I could see in the brief glimpse I got before I dropped the flashlight in fright, and by the time I picked it up, it had darted into the forest. I ran to the back of the cabin and stayed there for what seemed like forever, making sure it had gone before I went back to the generator. I didn't tell anyone when I went back inside what I had seen, and I don't really know why. I suppose it was to protect the children, and in case my wife didn't believe me. About a week afterwards, I started having a recurring nightmare. Every night I would dream about that night and wake up in cold sweats until I finally confessed to my wife about it all and started seeing a therapist to help me with my sleeping. I came across his channel looking for other people with similar experiences, and I have trouble finding accounts that match what I saw. I'd love to hear from anyone who thinks they've seen what I saw or who has dealt with a paranormal encounter. This is the strangest incident that has ever occurred in my life. In Jakarta, Indonesia, I reside in an urban area with densely populated houses and narrow alleys that only allow motorbike passage. This event just happened. It's already 3 inches the morning. The incident happened around 1.4 inches the morning. When I was returning home, riding my motorbike, at the last turn before my house, I stopped because I saw a strange creature in front of the gate. The shape of this creature is very strange. I can tell it's a dog because it has a long snout like a dog. The height is about 160 centimeters, the same size as the gate wall of my neighbor's house. The color of the body is earthy brown. It has long black ears hanging down. The body is really thin, skeleton-y, I can say, and it stands on 2 legs. Yes, 2 legs. I hope I saw wrong, or was crazy. Unfortunately, I saw with full awareness the creature was standing looking towards my house for a moment, and then it seemed like he realized where I was looking at him. For a few seconds we stared at each other. Then he went small, running on tiptoe, still using 2 legs. And now I'm scared to death because of it. I don't know what it is, and I need your help to find out what creature I just saw. Unknown Animal Sightings, Scotland. Hi all. I had an encounter with something I've never seen before in Scotland. October 2023. I was walking through Galloway Forest Park on a trail off the main path. I was meandering for a while through a trail with loads of logged land. I turned back, and on my way back, across the trail, about 30 yards in front of me was a huge red squirrel/otter type thing. I have lived in Scotland most of my life, and the first thing I thought was that this has to be a cryptid. Imagine a cross between an otter and a squirrel that had a bushy, bright red tail. It looked to be about 1.5 feet tall. I've seen plenty of red squirrels, but this creature was not just a massive red squirrel. I mean, it would have had to be the biggest squirrel. Compare it to seeing a 12-foot human because it also had the otter look to it as well. I am in good health and don't take drugs/drink. It wasn't a hallucination, etc. It was a very special moment seeing this thing. The creature was stopped on the trail, eating something. As I was approaching it, it spotted me, stood to attention, and I stopped. I had a split-second decision to make between taking my phone out for a picture and wanting to study this creature while I had the chance, knowing it would likely run as soon as I moved. We looked at each other for about a second or two, then I took a few steps closer with my hand in my pocket for my phone, and it was gone. True story, believe it or not. I searched after that to see what the closest thing could be, but I saw nothing that matched what I saw. I vaguely remember hearing some Irish folklore about a similarly sounding creature, but I just wanted to check if anyone has heard anything like this before. Cheers. B, just for context. I don't normally have weird things like this happen to me. Never saw a ghost, fairies, etc. I do believe in Bigfoot and some cryptids. The only other strange thing I have seen before was a UFO about 10 years before that. An anecdote an old logger told me. Last summer, I was waiting in the car in a doctor's office parking lot for a relative I took to an appointment. COVID was still a factor, so only patients were allowed in the air-conditioned building. And on this typical July afternoon, it was 100 degrees plus. One of those days where even with the car AC turned to the max, you're still going to look for shade. I quickly spotted a large area of shade. Clearly marked no parking next to the dumpsters, but I decided to take a risk and park there with the engine running and the AC set to maximum. Within 5 minutes, an older gentleman joined the party and parked his station wagon next to my truck. He got out to smoke a cigarette, which triggered my nicotine addiction and made me feel the urge to smoke one as well right then and there. We start a casual conversation about the weather. That quickly leads to local and not-so-local wildfires. Bark beetles killing trees here in California, the abundance of fuel for the fires, etc. He's very knowledgeable in the topic because apparently he was a logger in Washington and Oregon decades ago for several years. My antennas went up. Super casually, I dropped, "Ever seen a Bigfoot?" He quickly said, "Nah, but..." He then told me he grew up along the Trinity River in far northern California in the 1950s. He said his mother and grandmother told him when he was a kid if he heard people talking Chinese outside at night, it was just the Bigfoot family digging up and eating roots. He said that it wasn't until he was in boot camp at ages 17 to 18 that he realized other people either had never heard of Bigfoot or didn't believe they were real. And he didn't see the PG film until he was in his 20s or 30s. He basically said they were accepted as fact growing up, although he had never seen one. He also told me that recently he's been up camping in a local area I consider very off the beaten path, where he heard screams and took a picture of a possible footprint. He didn't have the pic on him. He was very matter-of-fact and mostly unimpressed with the topic, as he accepted it as real and not something casuals could/would understand. My relative returned to my truck, and after exchanging pleasantries with the old man, I left. I've often thought about his statements over the last year and have questions, just like some people listening to this. Eating roots? I didn't interview the guy or even follow up with casual questions. I just let him talk, but I could imagine that in that area, if people set up homesteads, they would grow a large portion of their diet. He never said they stole from their family garden. He said the people speaking Chinese were digging up roots by the house, maybe remnants of a nearby homestead where onions and potatoes and such started to grow naturally. I'm not sure. East Texas Dogman. My mom had a pretty intense encounter last year at her place in East Texas, and I've been trying to figure out what she saw ever since. For context, my mom has never believed in anything like this. No cryptids, nothing supernatural, nothing like that. She's always been very grounded, which is part of why this stuck with me. She was outside at night near her property, going out to plug in a hot wire because the dogs were going crazy. She had a flashlight on her, and that's when she saw it standing near the tiny house. At first she thought it was a huge wolf or maybe a mountain lion, but the size didn't make sense. She said it was easily around 48 inches or more at the shoulders and made our big Rottweiler look like a puppy in comparison. What really stood out to her was how broad its shoulders were and how massive its upper body looked. The part that shook her the most was its behavior. It didn't react to the dogs at all, even though they were going crazy. They were also clearly scared of it. It didn't bark, growl, or run. It just locked onto her and stayed completely focused, like it was watching and tracking her every movement. She said she backed away slowly with the flashlight on it the entire time, yelling for my grandma to bring her phone. The whole time, it stayed keyed in on her and didn't break eye contact. She said she felt genuinely intimidated and almost ran inside, but forced herself to stay calm and back away. After my grandma brought her the phone, the thing slowly turned away and walked off into the dark. No panic, no rush, just calmly left. It never acknowledged the dogs the entire time. She said she's never seen anything like it in her life. We're in a pretty rural, wooded area, and I know people will say it was a dog or something normal, but the size, posture, and the way it completely ignored the dogs and focused only on her are what make this hard to explain. Has anyone seen anything similar in East Texas? Was there a monster in the Philippines? Location: Kabungbungan, Sagong, La Castellana, Philippines. Date: June 9th, 2008 time. Late night. Two local men, Elias Galvez and Salvador Aguilar, reported to the police and to Mayor Alberto Nicor that they had been separately attacked by a hairy creature with long nails on the nights of June 9th and 10th. The unidentified monster, known locally as Amamongo, has been terrorizing local residents for the past month. The creature has been described by survivors of the attacks as being around 5.5 feet tall and looking like a monkey. Over the past 3 to 4 weeks, over 50 chickens and at least one goat have had their entrails ripped out of their stomachs and devoured by the creature. Aguilar managed to fight the beast off and fled to a hospital for treatment of large scratch wounds. Galvez was luckily rescued when friends heard his cries for help. Days later, when Eric Lozada was attacked by the man-sized hairy monster, he managed to slash the beast with a blade he was carrying as he fought it off. The blood on that blade has now been sent to police labs to ascertain exactly what is attacking the poor folk of La Castellana. Strange encounter. This incident occurred when I was a teenager. I'm 33 right now, and I have only discussed it with a few friends. I'm not sure what happened, but I would like to know if anyone has seen or heard of something like this. One night, my dad's sister and I shared a large bedroom in our house, which was undergoing remodeling. I awoke to go to the bathroom, but due to remodeling, the only one working was on the patio. Our house was a colonial house with a yard inside it, pretty common here in Colombia. Once I got out of the bathroom, I saw two huge yellow eyes looking at me from the ceiling. At first, I thought it was some kind of cat or something like that. As I took one step forward toward the creature, it stood up on its hind legs, and I could see a humanoid figure, long arms, almost 2 meters, 6 feet tall, and a normal-sized head, looking at me directly. I should have been horrified and maybe screaming. Like if I had just seen a monster. I was 13 or 14 years old by then, but instead I remember standing there looking at the creature, and after a few times, not sure how, it began to walk backwards and disappeared into the neighborhood ceilings. I used to live in an urban area with 1 or 2 floor houses, and after it was gone, I began walking to my bed as if nothing had happened. I remember this really vividly, just walking without thinking, almost like I had to go to my bed. I get there and fall asleep almost immediately. It wasn't until the next day I realized something weird happened. I spoke little or nothing about this for years until one night, almost 5 years later, when my father was going to sell the house and it had to be painted and a few things fixed. So a friend of mine and my girlfriend at that time decided to stay in the house. It was more a construction site at the time. My GF and I went to sleep, and he said he went to sleep on the couch, but after a while he wanted something to drink, so he went to the kitchen. We took a mini fridge and an electric kettle with us, but we only had electricity in the back of the house. So he went to the yard and he said he saw this tall, weird-looking creature, the same description as the one I saw years before, but I never told anyone before that because I would rather not sound crazy. He mentioned that after a short while, he started to walk back to the couch and fell asleep immediately, mirroring my own experience. When he recounted this to us the following morning, I was quite unsettled. I am unsure about what I saw or what he experienced. If anyone can share similar experiences, I would greatly appreciate it, as I am still trying to understand what happened in that house 17 years later. What did I see? Hi guys, I'm new here and looking for answers about what I might have seen. Driving through the suburbs of NJ at night, I witnessed an all-black shadow-like creature on all fours, which at first, from a distance, I thought was a large black dog. As I approached, it became clear it was not, as it was way too large and lanky. In an instant, the thing appeared to fold its limbs down in a very unnatural fashion before standing up on its back legs. This thing must have been 7 to 8 feet tall. It stood up near a road sign and was slightly taller than the sign itself. As my car approached, it dashed off into the trees faster than I've seen anything move. I have tried to think of normal, reasonable explanations for what it could have been, but it felt far too unnatural. Seeing it left me completely shaken. Any ideas on what this might have been? A little story about a creature my area has been in a frenzy over a creature in the woods. The evidence we have of the creature existing is one set of footprints and blurry chem footage. I have seen it late at night at the edge of the woods. Doesn't sound like much evidence, does it? But everyone still entirely believes in it. That is because this creature is a black bear. My area hasn't had black bear sightings in years. We have a large number of outdoorsmen and hunters in the area, and none of them have found any evidence of the bear existing, leaving us with only a small set of knowledge that confirms to us that the bear is real. What I mean by sharing this is that a creature of decent size can exist in an area without leaving almost any marks or impact on its environment. Footage of a creature probably will be blurry because it's hard to focus a camera or hold it steady. Who's to say that other medium-sized animals couldn't be out there that we don't know about? We barely know about the bears in our own woods. The story from my Navajo mother's childhood, so a bit of background info. My grandfather, a Navajo medicine man, raised my mother on the Navajo reservation, and she would often share stories about her childhood. However, most fascinating to me were her stories of skinwalkers, which she was always very hesitant to talk about, let alone write about. I had often thought about writing them out myself, but I figured if I were going to share them, then it had better be in her words. Finally, after much convincing, she agreed to send me one of them via email for me to share with you guys. Years ago, when I was about 12 years old or so, I spent many winters with my grandparents. They had an amazing sheep camp in a canyon where they set up a tiny cabin and allowed the sheep to graze, protecting them from the cold winter elements. I grew up with stories of skinwalkers and witchcraft all my life, but never really thought they were real. I viewed it as like a cartoon. They were still scary stories, though. Living in the canyon for the winter was very isolated. But my grandparents were amazing and loving. At night, every now and then, dogs would start barking. My grandpa would go outside to see if the animals were okay. Otherwise, it was so peaceful there in the canyon. One night, dogs started barking and would not stop. They were barking outside for 5 minutes at least, so Grandpa went out with his huge flashlight and tried to see what was going on. He said he felt a creepy vibe and wasn't comfortable being outside at that point, so we stayed sheltered in the Hogan house. The dogs continued to bark, and the aggression in their tone was very apparent. They were obviously irate and upset. There was growling and screeching, such scary noises. This continued for at least an hour, and Grandpa stated it could be a mountain lion or maybe some wild animal that came down from the mazes. It wasn't until the morning that we went outside and found a wild scene. When my grandparents set up camp in the canyon, their heat source was a wood stove, so they had a pile of firewood about 500 feet from the home. Next to the firewood that morning was a battle scene. There were traces of blood, fur, and scratch marks at the scene. Our dogs looked worn out, and the littlest of our dogs was huddled in on the side of the house. The first thing my grandpa did was check the sheep. They were all fine and safe. Grandpa then started to investigate. There were drops of blood from the scene, along the road, and up into the mesa. We followed the tracks, which at times seemed like the footprints of a large cat, but then we noticed it was odd. Now there is snow on the ground, so we can easily see the prints. And my grandpa keeps saying these animal footprints don't look right. Sure enough, as we trace the prints up the mesa trail, we continue to see pools of blood, and at one point, whatever animal it was had crawled up to a ledge that no dog or cat could reach if it were on 4 feet. It appeared that the animal had sat there, as we found a clear print of a bloodied hand, alongside prints of the same cat or animal. That was something we all could not explain. My uncle and my dad came, and the men continued to track where it led to, and we turned around and needed to get household chores done. When the men returned, my grandpa stated that the trail led several miles before it disappeared. Skinwalkers are unexplainable. Did I continue to have doubts? Of course, I still had doubts, but I witnessed with my own eyes that no animal could climb such a steep rock and sit there holding a bloodied hand. In addition, all the weird fur by the woodpile was crazy. That's my story. I was stuck in a car for 45 minutes with a strange creature outside. So this incident happened a few days ago. I live in Turkey. The story starts with me and my parents going to my uncle's merism, like a wedding. It was nighttime. After it ended, we went to the spouse's house, but I told my parents I wanted to stay in the car as I was tired. They went to the house, not knowing they would not come back to the car for a while or forget about me. I was all by myself in an underdeveloped street right next to a forest-like area. When I looked over there was a pale, hairless figure that felt like a dream. It was looking right at me, and when I saw it, I instantly went for the car door to lock it. After that, we had a weird and creepy staring contest. At times it would move significantly, especially when I began to doubt whether this was an illusion. It moved, and it moved quite noticeably. It turned around, walked away from the small mound it was onto next to a tree, looked down on the ground, and came back, after what felt like an eternity. I heard my dad calling my name, without even thinking. I got out of the car and ran towards my dad. The house was close, so I went in. After I spent some safe time away from the monster, we left the house to go home, but the creature wasn't there anymore, probably having gone away. I don't know what it was, I just know it was weird and scary. A gruesome Bigfoot encounter. In the late 1890s near the Chetco River in southern Oregon, a dozen loggers and their families encountered a great beast with disastrous results. Camping in tents by the river, the lumbermen would awaken each morning to find their freshly cut timber, logs that required 3 men to move, carelessly scattered about like matchsticks. Huge human footprints left in the damp earth were the only clues. Since they had been troubling bears, the men followed the footprints through the torn shrubbery and uprooted saplings until they disappeared. That night, shrill screams of something not quite human in the near underbrush awakened the loggers. Seizing a rifle, one man lit a torch and headed into the darkness. He was quickly followed by several other men. In a very short time, the first man rushed back to collapse in terror at the feet of his tracking companions. He babbled incoherently about a hairy monster 8 feet tall with yellow eyes, fangs, and hands like a man. His description put the camp in an uproar. The next night, 2 men decided to track and kill the hairy intruder. They carried a small lantern and loaded rifles and disappeared into the darkness behind the tents. Back in camp, their friends heard screams and shrieks and the sounds of gunfire. Then, silence. When the 2 men did not reappear, the other loggers grabbed lanterns and torches and, while firing their guns into the air, set out in search of their comrades. A half-mile from camp, they found the scene of a desperate struggle, broken and bleeding, something with incredible strength that slammed them against trees and torn them into pieces. Blood dripped into small pools from branches high in the trees, as well as from the crushed greenery of the surrounding shrubs. But of the hairy creature responsible, there were only bloody footprints leading deep into the woods. The loggers struck camp and left the area the next day. Professional hunters entered the forest in the days that followed, but found no sign of the creature. Skinwalker folklore from Mount Merapi, Indonesia. Hey guys, I became interested in this folklore, along with other similar stories like Goatman and Fleshgate, and I really started getting into and feeling freaked out by them. They reminded me of something I heard from my best friend, who lives in Indonesia. I went to visit him, and because of the lore surrounding Mount Merapi, a volcano near his city, he wouldn't take me to hike up it. This volcano has a long history involving local voodoo-like folk religions and traditions. In general, the locals avoid this place due to its creepy atmosphere. One specific thing my friend told me, though, was that if you do want to hike up the volcano, you must do so in a group with an even number of people. When I asked what happens to odd groups of people, he told me that the group is made even. Usually, when the group is setting up camp for the night and sitting around the fire, they might make a quick count of the people sitting around and realize that they now have one more, making them an even number. They'll then notice the one person that they don't recognize, just sitting among the group but not saying anything. I haven't heard of anything worse happening after that, though. He told me that when this happened to a group of his friends, they noticed the stranger but didn't say anything out of fear of rousing the stranger in any way, and they just quietly went to bed. Then the next morning the stranger was gone, and they hightailed it down the volcano. Apparently, this is common knowledge from everyone that I talked to there, and everyone had a story either from themselves or someone they knew. So anyway, that's what came to mind when I read a few Skinwalker stories. Maybe there could be one living on the side of that volcano somewhere? I'm going to look deeper into it the next time I visit Indonesia, especially now that I know more about the traits of skinwalkers, and I'll look for stories of voice mimicry and whatnot. And most of all, I want to find a group willing to go up as an odd number. Any remote chance anyone else here knows anything about Mount Merapi or any other modern lore that's similar? What did I see? Hey everyone, I'm new here, just looking for answers. I live in a small town near the Pennsylvania border in New York. I have woods and a giant field next to and behind my house. One night around 10 to 30 or 11 o'clock, while I was taking the trash out before bed, my cat escaped, so I followed her to the field. When I went to grab her, I saw a creature on all fours at the edge of the wooded area, with pale white sunken-in eyes and skin that looked stretched out. It was almost like a crab-crawling stance. I know from my readings that I should not react, so I ignored it. However, the fear I felt was unreal. I could feel whatever it was watching me. I grabbed my cat and walked back to the house. The whole time, I felt like whatever it was I had seen was right behind me and that if I were to turn around, it would grab me. I got inside, shut the door, and dropped the cat and just started crying. I was that scared, I haven't seen it again since that night. But then again, I also don't go outside near the woods anymore. If anyone has an idea of what it possibly was, I would love to know. One time, when two of my friends and I were walking around in Darcy, a small town in southwest Canada, late at night after hanging out at one of their houses, we decided to go smoke weed at the lake, which was about a 2-minute walk from my house and a 30-minute walk from my friend's house. However, before we got there, we stopped one street away from my house to change the music to match the vibe. So we were standing under one of the only working street lights in our town. And while my friend L, I'll call him, was on his phone picking a song, Mikey and I were standing there talking. We turned around, looking up the street together, staring at the only other street light, about 100 feet away, when we saw a 9-foot-tall, pale, hairless creature with very long, slender legs, a small head, and no tail. At that time, we could only refer to it as a skinwalker, a term not from our region or a rake. However, in retrospect, I believe it was something beyond our understanding, as I have never seen or heard anything like it before. Anyways, we only saw it for a second as it ran across the street incredibly fast, like as fast as a car, but it didn't make a sound, and I know what we saw was real because we both saw it and described it the exact same way. Plus, it was under a light, and you couldn't mistake it for anything else. Also, I'm an aphantasiac, so I can't see things and I don't hallucinate. So obviously, we turned to our friend who was on his phone and explained it to him. Then we decided to remain silent about the incident, continue walking, go to my house, and call his stepdad to pick us up and drive us to his house for the night. Thereafter, everything was safe and okay, but we never saw anything again like that. However, in the center of our town, the same week, if I recall correctly, a res dog, essentially a stray dog that's friendly, was ended during the night, and when people investigated the body, it wasn't killed the normal way, like how cougars usually do. Cougars kill many things where we're from. Instead, it was skinned and left to die. Most people believe that a cougar was responsible for its death, but my friends and I suspect it was the creature we had encountered previously. The native legends, which I'm part native to and my friends are too, that our elders told us are that creatures like these are bad omens. And when you speak of bad omens, like saying their names, it can conjure them, so we never talked about the thing we saw, which is why this is basically the first time I've talked about this online, Additionally, if there are more of these creatures worldwide, the government will likely attempt to conceal them. Therefore, I have refrained from discussing them out of fear that it would make me a target. However, after careful consideration, I decided to share my experience in the hope of connecting with others who may be familiar with the creature I am referring to. Something's out there in Red Rock Canyon. I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and a popular nature escape for many locals is a nature preserve area called Red Rock Canyon, which is part of a larger BLM network. This preserve is made of multiple hiking areas and a couple of off-road trails for 4x4 vehicles. One of these trails is called the Willow Springs Picnic Area, an off-road trail, which connects to the La Madre Mountain Wilderness and is home to petroglyphs left over from the Paiute tribe. Yesterday, my husband and I decided to go on a little excursion on this trail. We took our Ford to escape up the slow, winding trail until we came to a pull-off where we stopped to appreciate the scenery and for me to harvest some prickly pears, cactus fruit to snack on later. About then, a couple in jogging/hiking gear with no camping equipment and no supplies or even water bottles walked up the rough, rocky dirt road. Something was off about this couple. When I nodded to greet them and gave them a simple howdy, they cut me a look of cold aggression and anger, and then in exact unison they nodded back as though they were copying exactly what I had just done to them. And by in unison, I mean they did it as though they were one person controlling two bodies. A few moments later, we pulled ahead, fully expecting to have to pass them on the trail. This trail is meant more for vehicles than people, and if you're going to hike it, you are probably going to find that it is slow going. However, we never ran into them again. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Later, we turned around because it was getting late, we didn't have camping gear, and it felt like someone was watching us. When we got back to the parking lot, my husband decided to take some photos, and in several pictures there were red eyes peering back at us from the cliffs. Furthermore, this is not the first time we felt like we were being watched on that trail. Hitchhiking through eastern central Oregon. My first experience. I will first start off by saying I'm not entirely sure if what I saw was a skinwalker or not, but it was definitely terrifying. My boyfriend and I arrived in the small town of Burns, Oregon, a few days ago. It was too late to continue hitchhiking, so we decided to camp in a for-sale field next to a closed-down grocery store. We always watch a few episodes of our favorite shows until we either get tired or our phone dies. This night, our phone died first, so we sat up talking until about 1 a.m. and finally decided to try and get some sleep. Now, this was next to impossible because while this town is very much so in the high desert, there are lots of farms that use irrigation. The mosquitoes were awful, and we had no bug spray. Before getting to sleep, I notice about 100+ yards away somebody walking along the fence line across the field from us. I think nothing of it, and just assume it was a local tweaker or something, nothing we haven't had to deal with before. Plus, we have a dog that would alert us if they decided to come closer while sleeping. The only weird part is the fact that they weren't walking towards any houses. They were walking towards a huge open field that was behind us. Also, they would walk a ways, stop, look in our direction, then repeat. We finally get to sleep around 2:30 to 3 o'clock, and almost as soon as we do, we hear this through-thump, conk. I jump up and scream, "What the F?" as this huge black silhouette figure slowly runs past us. It was less than 10 feet away from us. It was like the shape of a wolf, but seemed bigger. It was dark, but this figure seemed to disappear into thin air. Mind you, the field we were in did not have tall grass. Not even 2 minutes later, a deer appeared out of thin air and slowly walked by us. It kept staring at us and just gave me such an eerie feeling. My boyfriend tried to console me and say it was probably just a deer that we saw, but it turns out that was just to help me sleep. The next day, he explained to me in detail what he saw, and it was exactly as I described above. The encounter might not seem like much, but it was definitely a terrifying experience. Bigfoot. Scene 1. Wouldn't expect anybody to believe me, and I didn't have a stance either way before, but 3 of my friends and my stories all match up. We were in a car with 5 people driving in an unfinished neighborhood in NW, Georgia, non-intoxicated Lowell just after dark. The creature we saw across the road about 30 yards in front, moving pretty quickly but not running. He turned and looked at the car before crossing into a patch of whisk grass about 6 feet tall. His head cleared the grass by 1 to 2 feet. There is absolutely no doubt about what I saw. What stood out wasn't size, but definition. There is no way it could be any sort of suit, and who in the world would be in a rural, unfinished neighborhood in the middle of nowhere? This place saw virtually no traffic and was overgrown. The muscle and broadness of shoulder are what really grabbed my attention. The thigh muscles were very clear, and I could literally see the contours of the vastus lateralis muscle, the rectus femoris muscle, and the IT band, which runs down the side of the leg. Unless there was an 8-foot-tall super freak athlete with fur running across the country in the night, what we saw was a Sasquatch. It was wonderful how, after a few seconds, the people I was with recounted the exact same story, how, where, and what it looked like, to a T. And we had no reason to bullshit each other. I have held an exact snapshot of the moment in mind ever since. Disclaimer, I consider myself a spiritual person, in that I believe in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. That being said, I just feel so blessed to be able to experience that moment and appreciate the mystery and mystique behind some of his creations. From my analytical and scientific perspective, I find it incredibly intriguing that the species truly exists. I have personal proof and feel very lucky, and that it is so impressive. As a hunter/outdoor enthusiast my whole life, I am even more impressed. I could speculate all day on theories as to their elusiveness, but I just wanted to share a brief version of the story. Thanks for listening. My first encounter, when I did not believe in them yet, was a gnome when I was hiking alone on a forest trail. I had learned to meditate only a year or 2 before, though. I'd stopped and sat down due to feeling odd, almost afraid. I had simply never feared being alone out in nature before. The gnome materialized about 15 feet away and became dense in 3D, since I couldn't see through him. He let me stare for a couple of minutes, then very slowly and purposefully faded away, as if he wanted me to see and know. I heard no voice, but was given the message that he, or they, simply did not want anyone coming into their territory that day. That was in 1977. The most recent, during day-to-day life, was a wow, and it led me here into a new chapter of studies for my life. I was in a very small rural post office, having gotten mail from a P.O. box, and I realized a tall 6 feet 6 inches or so, shock white ghost was staring at me with love-glowing blue eyes and a too-nice-for-the-area, long brown, tailored coat. His hair was short and combed back, and so white the area around his head blurred into light. I was totally shocked, but not afraid. By this time in life, I believe everything is real to someone. LOL. Anyhow, I glanced over a few times, and he never moved an inch. I finally faced him, cocked my head like a curious dog, and smiled really big at him. Goodness. He was so amused, and I felt such joy from him. Then my knowing was simply, he is not human. I spoke some superficial nonsense because I was not in my logical mind anymore. It really was a shock to my mind and body to be near a dimensional alien. He talked to me telepathically, but I lost several minutes. My big goal right now is remembering. So right before I left the post office, he never walked out. His face suddenly looked sad and changed, even with that big, close-mouthed smile he wore and those wise, loving, glowing eyes. I then strongly felt that he didn't really look as human in his natural form. That was mid-January 2026. I was in a cabin in upstate New York. I finished having private time with my boyfriend afterwards. We went out back for a smoke in the night air. We shut off the lights to see the stars and quietly listened to the trickling brook. Then something extremely heavy starts leaping and bounding through the woods right towards us. Slam, slam, cough, thud. Absolutely not a sound I've heard before or since. It felt like the earth was rumbling as it barreled over. It suddenly stopped a mere 50 feet from us. We froze and looked out into the dark forest. Then a few seconds later, curse, splash. Like a sizable rock was just tossed into the water right in front of where we sat. I looked past the sound to a tree where I hung a hammock over the brook, and staring back at me from the tree was the biggest creature I've ever seen. Probably 8 to 9 feet tall, covered in hair. Couldn't see the eyes, but I could make out the contours of their faces. It had a big head and those ridiculously broad shoulders that we always hear about. After a good 20 seconds in shock, I panicked and ran inside. We didn't sleep much that night. I believe I may have encountered a yowie. For context, I am familiar with the myth of the Australian yowie, although I have never really been convinced that such a creature actually exists. I believe that seeing is believing, sure, and I am still not 100% convinced that it was a yowie. However, I have nothing else really to explain my experience. The only reason I am sharing is because I need to give myself some sort of closure and explanation of this strange encounter I had in the early hours of yesterday morning. I am always awake at really odd times of the day. Usually because I like to escape reality and enjoy my freedom by enjoying the peaceful times of night. I am a smoker, but my girlfriend absolutely hates it, and God forbid if she ever caught me smoking again, she would lose the plot. So, I like to smoke away from the house at this park near the edge of the suburbs. For those familiar with Australian cities, as soon as you reach the very edge of the urban sprawl in the suburbs, where the housing estates meet the bush line, you'd be familiar that the bush line is a never-ending dense forest that can stretch for over 100 kilometers until meeting the mountain ranges. In Queensland, I reside near the bush line and the end of civilization, with this park located right at the edge of our estate, about 3 a.m. Yesterday morning, I was enjoying my alone time, meditating and smoking at the park, like I usually do and have done for many years, until I noticed unusual noises and had this strange feeling I was being stalked. I was reading a book, and in the distance, coming from the tree lines, I heard voices, familiar voices, like I thought I heard my dad calling my name, which made me uneasy. I thought at first I could blame it on my lack of sleep. As the minutes passed, though, I heard a loud tree knock that echoed, and immediately caught my attention. I looked around hyper-focused, thinking maybe someone was messing around with me, as kids usually come down here to do naughty things. However, this was unusual. I became terrified, as if my body was in fight-or-flight mode, so I quickly started moving towards my car. After getting in my car, I decided to stay for a little longer just to see if any kids would come out of the bush. They did not. As I turned slightly to my right, I saw an almost slender shadow that looked like a moving tree branch coming from the direction of the strange noises, and it completely froze when I observed it. I looked away, then refocused my attention on the spot, and it vanished. This was extremely unsettling, and I am still not convinced of the Yowie's existence, but I am still unable to explain what I saw. I was 12 to 13 when I first encountered a crawler. This story takes place in the hills above Lake Sammamish, Washington, in a heavily wooded area. One day, my friends and I were out doing what 3-year-olds do at 11 p.m. when we reached a stormwater pond bordering a forest. We halted halfway through the trail, sensing something amiss. We all felt as if someone was observing us. Suddenly, 3 humanoid creatures, roughly 5 feet tall, crawled across the trail as if it were a casual Sunday. They stopped and stared at us for 2 solid minutes before moving on. In shock, we whispered, "What was that?" and went to check where they had entered the woods, but we found no footprints or tracks. It has been 2 years since then, and though I visit that pond casually, nothing has happened since. However, back in 6th grade, my friends and I were biking past a different stormwater pond when something reached out from the ledge of the trail to grab my foot. I felt uneasy the whole time and managed to pedal faster just in time to escape. When we cleared the trail, we looked back and saw it standing there, simply observing us. We went home and haven't talked about it since, and luckily, everyone is still alive. I know most people would probably brush it off as kids' imagination, but it wasn't. All of us clearly remember those figures, the way they moved, and the way I physically felt one touch my bike. Help identify being stalked. My friend and I noticed something a few months ago while driving home from a movie. My friend was driving, and she saw something dart across the road, and she described it as tall, lanky, and very fast. After we first saw it, we both got a really bad feeling like we needed to hide. And ever since then, over the months, we no longer feel safe leaving our homes at night, and we even sometimes don't feel safe inside. We will sometimes see a figure or sometimes two standing in shaded areas with little visibility just watching us, and it will often actively avoid being spotted. But recently the feeling has gotten worse to the point of panic and genuine fear. We think it might be a pair or even a group of things, given we can see or feel impending danger or figures in different places at once. And I've even had animals react, so we are pretty sure it's not in our heads. We know it specifically avoids daylight and tends to stay away from streetlights, possibly because it does not want to be seen. We've had it circle the house and tap on doors and windows, actively looking for a way in. And even my friends' cats will show signs of discomfort and wanting to hide. We don't know what it is. All we know is that it isn't human. It isn't a normal animal. We have tried figuring out on our own what it is, but each time we get a lead, we run into something that doesn't match up with our experience and that the creature we were thinking of isn't known for doing. We're scared and just want to get separate opinions. Nobody believes us. But we know we are being followed/hunted. Possible encounters and strange events that have happened to me over my time living with my family in the San Bernardino Mountains. The first event I can remember happening while living here happened when we first moved here 2 years ago. I excited that I would meet some new people. They didn't get along with my old neighbors. They were idiots. Decided to greet the neighbors along with my sister, who was living/is living with my family. We went around and met our neighbors. Most seemed friendly and welcoming. When we got to the house, in the middle of the neighborhood, the house in question is the place that seems abandoned, we knocked on the door, no answer. We knocked again, and this time we heard some kind of slump noise, like what you would expect from someone throwing a rotten pumpkin on the floor. I thought maybe the person inside was just fumbling around and knocked something over, and I would rather not seem rude. So I stayed there with my sister, waiting for about 25 seconds, and neither of us heard anything. As we were leaving, we did smell something awful, like if you had an infected wound, that kind of stench that just makes you want to gag. At the time, I thought nothing of it. I didn't even know what a skinwalker was, and even if I did, I still wouldn't have made that assumption. I don't know if this event was significant, but thinking back, it was strange. So I decided to throw it in here. The next strange thing happened when I was just sort of parkouring around my neighborhood to get to a small forest next to it. I had already known the house next to ours was unowned and had been for some time. Judging by the state of it, there was trash and leaves strewn throughout the house. I looked through the sliding glass door. I decided to break in and see what the duck was going on in there. Leaves, dirt, and shit like that. in a house with no open windows/doors. It smelled terrible inside, not like human feces, but more like the kind of shit an elephant would produce if it had diarrhea. I figured some bums or animals might have been taking shelter in the house, but I found 4 brown leather coats hanging in the closet of one of the rooms. It was weird for sure, but just in case, I was not about to steal some hobos-only clothing. I left them there and continued to the forest without thinking much about the house. The final event I'm going to talk about in this anyway is when my sister and I actually saw a skinwalker. After living here for 6 months, I found this community and listened to almost every skinwalker story. We were headed to a bowling alley in Riverside, and on the way I pulled out my laptop, started telling scary stories from online, and decided to share one about skinwalkers while my sister was driving. After the story was over, my sister was fine and actually wanted to know more about skinwalkers. I had a conversation with her about them and told her the important bits before continuing to tell other stories. On the way to the bowling alley, we left at 7, so it was already getting dark. We went down a road with trees on both sides, and I swear we saw a skinwalker. It was like some kind of bony spider human. It was on all 4s and had what looked like goat horns and gray fur and long bony legs. It darted into the forest extremely fast when we came within 15 feet of it. Needless to say, my sister and I were freaked out of our minds, panicking and wondering what the duck it was. The second I said skinwalker, she just gave me a cold, wide-eyed look and floored it. She told me on the way she swore she heard someone screaming a few times, but didn't know what it was about. So she didn't stop or tell me at this point. She was crying and panicking, believing she was going to die. So I simply slapped her and tried to calm her down then, and I swear I will never forget this. The thing ducking chased us down the road. I got a good look at it as it ran after us. We must have been going 90 miles an hour by now, but the thing was catching up with us. We were both panicking and screaming, but as we came to the end of the forest, it disappeared, and neither of us said a word until we were at the bowling alley. We convinced each other that the creature was either some kind of goat or a strange man wearing a goat pelt. Honestly, we were just trying to ignore the experience. Still, we never took that road again. The thing is, my family and I are planning a camping trip near that area in a couple of months. Any advice? A lot of weird shit goes on where we live that I could tell stories about, but not many more of them resemble skinwalkers. Confusing encounter. I had a very strange experience that felt like it could have been supernatural. I embarked on a solo hike today, which marked my first experience hiking alone. I didn't run into many people at all during my hike. I was alone about 99% of the time. About halfway through the hike, I am filled with a sense of dread. My heart races and I sense an eerie silence surrounding me. I thought I was just having a bout of anxiety about being in the middle of nowhere alone, but I couldn't shake this uncomfortable feeling. I get to the top of my incline, and I see a large coyote. I thought it was a German shepherd. It was pretty big, but I noticed the bushy tail and knew it was a coyote. I was a little spooked, but it disappeared. Another coyote comes out and looks at me. It's frozen, and then it starts heading directly to me. I pull out my phone for some reason to take photos of them. They were pretty, and I wanted proof, lol. I start to get really nervous, and then it hides again. Out of nowhere, this guy is right next to me and has a Scottish accent. I tell him I saw coyotes and to be careful. He starts talking about coyotes coming after him in the past and starts walking next to me. It was weird, but I didn't want to be rude, so I let him talk. All of a sudden, he goes quiet, like he's factory reset, but continues to walk next to me. A big puddle comes up. I walk around it and think he is going to follow. I look behind, and he is like 1/8 mile away from me, but still walking in my direction. I was so confused, he was right next to me. Then I get all the way around the puddle and look back. Now he's gone. Huh? I was so confused. I kept looking around and couldn't find him. I just kept going and looked about every minute or so, and no one was to be found. I got back to where my car was and went to look up the photos of the coyotes I took, and the photos aren't there. I know I took a bunch. Did I just imagine all this? Was this something paranormal? My brother and I encountered a crawler while driving. This is a true story that occurred when my brother and I were in our mid-20s and living in Middle Tennessee. We were driving through a densely wooded area on our way out to a friend's house to buy some weed, a long highway road that leads to Murfreesboro. This was late at night, around 11 p.m., as we'd worked the late shift together at a Ruby Tuesday and had pretty much just gotten home/settled, but were out of weed. My brother was driving, I was in the passenger seat. On our way there, after following our directions and turning into a more suburban area off of the highway, we passed a big, wide open field to our left. Something caught my eye, so I looked over. What I saw is best described as a completely bald, naked, skinny, humanoid-like figure with a terrifying-looking face. It was grimacing at us and charging directly at our car from about 150 yards away, and it was moving at alarming speed, faster than any animal I've ever seen. I shouted, "What the F?" So my brother looked and immediately saw it too. He reflexively stepped on the gas. In a matter of seconds, it had closed the gap and was literally leaping through the air at us. My only thought at the time was, it's coming into the car. It's going to crash straight through the window. I flinched right at the point of impact/closed my eyes, but then nothing happened as we continued driving forward. We both looked around, trying to figure out what the fuck just happened/where the thing went, but we could see no trace of it, and there was no crashing sound or impact with the car, at least not one that either of us had noticed. I just assumed that whatever it was, it thankfully ducking missed, or we managed to just barely escape it unscathed. However, about 1.5 minutes later, after driving at around 50 miles per hour to get as far away from that area as possible and unfortunately missing our turn/getting a bit lost, since we'd never been to this friend's house and were just following directions, we got a flat tire. The flat tire was on the rear driver's side, which is the same side where the creature charged at us. I still, to this day, have no explanation for what the duck that thing was that we saw. It was not a mountain lion or a hyena or anything like that. It was humanoid in appearance, despite running with its body hunched forward and using its hands to move faster. I doubt it was a homeless crackhead, but you never know. If so, I'd like to know which drugs he was on so I can try them. I struggled to describe its face, except to say it appeared feral, had very dangerous-looking eyes, and was gritting what seemed to be a pair of sharp, jagged teeth. It just looked very mean, almost demonic. After hearing a story about one of these creatures jumping into a person's truck while he was driving, I believe that our decision to speed up and drive into a more populated area with actual houses may have saved our lives, as there was a good chance this creature was literally on top of our car, attempting to make us stop by stabbing our tire. It still creeps me out when I think about it. I was sober at the time, we were out of weed, and at this point in our lives we mostly just drank. No LSD, shrooms, synthetics, or anything that could cause us both to hallucinate at the same time. We still talk about this regularly and remember it vividly. Strange things. I have a good one that sticks with me to this day. Went camping/shooting with a group of guys I met in Washington. We went in this area that was really dry. Most of the trees were dead. The grass was dry. You really didn't see many birds, deer, or really anything. It was eerily quiet out there. Cue an awesome time. Drinking, shooting, talking, eating. Guys were awesome. I wish I still had contact with them. Nighttime came around and I decided to sleep next to the fire, like I did with my dad during our several-day mountain hike roughing it adventures. The starlight was unrestricted, and I fell asleep transfixed by their limitless beauty. I awoke shortly, some time later, for no apparent reason. I am a light sleeper around noises, but don't wake up on my own for no reason, so I pretended to sleep while listening closely. If it was an animal, I wanted to observe it without spooking it. I slowly opened my eyes to see the empty campsite I fell asleep to. I slowly turned my head and checked all around me. Clear. Now, at this point, I should point out that I myself am a predator. Aggressive in nature, my brain chooses fight before flight the majority of the time. Sitting by that fire, I could tell something was watching me intently, and I felt the hairs on my neck telling me it was very, very close. I reached over and put my shotgun on my lap, barrel facing into the dark woods. I slowed my breathing to hear something, anything, my eyes transfixed on this dark space between two beer coolers. Suddenly, from the darkness, between the coolers, an object in the exact same size and shape as a Roomba comes skittering out with the exact movement of an insect. Extremely fast, direct line to my feet in the sleeping bag. I was still half asleep. For about 0.5 seconds, my brain was debating whether or not that actually just happened. Nothing touched the bag or my feet. I dropped the shotgun and sat up straight, pulling my feet towards me, while simultaneously reaching out in case the creature lunged at me, forcing me to defend myself. Right when I move, the creature flies back in the same speed and direction it came from, disappearing into the darkness. Round in, shotgun up, duck you, die. I'm not moving, not breathing. We might lose both coolers, but I'm not letting that thing into my sleeping bag for a cuddle session. 10 seconds, 20, minute, nothing. I lowered the shotgun. Did I imagine this whole thing? It ran into the light, but it was still this indistinguishable, black and featureless. It was the size of a large raccoon, but moved like a ducking spider freebasing Ritalin. I must have been dreaming, I thought. There is no boom ducking thing comes, just smoking back out of the darkness for my feet again. I jump up out of bed and grab the shotgun and the headlamp just as this creature disappears back into the darkness. I followed it into the woods. My mind was racing. That couldn't have been a ducking spider. That would be bigger than the ones in Iraq. It moved way faster than a squirrel, and plus it made no noise, never turned directions, and was like a perfect circle of complete emptiness. I watched it come out into the direct light twice, and both times it was completely featureless. I made it about 100 yards into the darkness. It was so quiet, no sign of life anywhere. My headlamp felt like a giant red target painted on my chest. So I clicked it off and walked back in the darkness. My eyes adjusted, but I never saw anything move on my way back. Slept in the car that night. Looked around the coolers for markings or droppings. Nothing. What a ducking trip. Cryptid sighting? A few years ago, I was on a date, and we went to Caw Point Park around midnight for a stroll. We ended up finding a log by the river and were sitting discussing life and watching the river. There was a bunch of bushes, maybe 10 feet to my left, and they were at least 7 feet high. I started hearing rustling in the bushes, but we blew it off and thought it was a raccoon or something. A few minutes later, I hear rustling again, and I turn and look at the bushes. When I did, I saw a figure starting to stand up in the bushes. Its shoulders were almost as high as the bushes, but there was no head attached to them. My friend and I ran back onto the trail and headed toward the parking lot after I grabbed them. We could hear it running, making no noise except the sounds of steps racing after us. We stopped at the point part of the park and looked behind us. We were standing in the moonlight. And whatever it was didn't want to leave the shadows. It had taken a single step into the moonlight, and I watched a massive claw slink back into the darkness. We freaked TF out and ran towards the parking lot. It continued chasing us through the trees until we ran past the boat ramp. Also worth noting, I was completely sober. LMAO. This was like 3 or 4 years ago, but it still haunts me, and I can't really figure out what I was running from. I've read up on Momo, but I doubt that's what it was. Does anyone else have any insight? Or has anyone seen anything like that around the river? Any help is appreciated. Possible skinwalker running up Lone Peak Canyon. My two buddies and I were in Lone Peak Canyon, planning to sleep under the stars and leave the next day. So we got everything set up and decided to go swim in the lake. On our way back, we saw a single deer with abnormally large eyes and ears, and it had odd proportions in general. I've grown up in Utah Valley my whole life, and I've seen thousands of deer, so I know what they usually look and act like. The deer was sitting on a rock like a dog, and it turned its head to watch us without giving any reaction. Its head seemed to turn and follow while its body stayed perfectly still. It almost looked like its head was detached from its body. I decided that it was just an odd occurrence and that I should just ignore it. This was at 4 p.m. About 30 minutes later, while we were at our campsite, we saw the same deer chasing another, but it stopped and continued to just look at us for maybe 5 minutes. When we all looked away, it almost just disappeared. Maybe it took off as soon as we looked away, but this was also odd. 30 minutes after that, we saw the same deer, probably 200 yards away, up on the side of the hill overlooking us. It stayed there for at least 45 minutes, just staring at us. The fourth time we saw it was later around 9:3 p.m. when we were in our sleeping bags, getting ready to go to bed. The deer came up from the river that we were next to, probably 20 feet away, and just looked at us again for maybe 2 minutes and then went back down. Same thing happened again in the same spot 15 minutes later. It almost seemed to be checking if we had gone to sleep yet. It continued to check on us one more time 15 minutes later again. At this point, I was a little freaked out, but didn't want to say anything because I was afraid my friends would say I was imagining things. So we all tried to go to bed, and at about 1:03:02 to 1:45, we started hearing something maybe 10 feet away just under the hill that led to where the river was. We continued to hear what sounded like a deer walking in the river and coming to look in on us. Every time it got close, we would start talking and shine our lights into the trees to see if we could see anything. This happened enough to the point that we grabbed everything and left at midnight. On our way down, my buddies said they kept seeing silhouettes off to our sides. The entire way down, we kept seeing weird things. For example, we saw a deer right next to the road, staring at the mountainside as if it were looking at nothing, not moving or reacting or grazing. We continued to see more and more deer that were behaving oddly. But keep in mind that we've seen thousands of deer in that canyon and they never acted like that. Please, anyone, let me know if you think it might have been something. My dad's Bigfoot experience. Growing up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, my dad, for all of my childhood, was a truck driver for Pepsi. My dad always tried to be present for sporting events and important school events, but it was situational if he'd actually make those events, depending on his trucking routes. Looking back, I recognize that my dad felt a lot of guilt for missing out on events in my sisters and my lives, but he was always transparent about his situation, even when it involved admitting he didn't have enough money for gas to make it to my soccer game. He really was the most honest person that has ever existed in my life. When I was 14 years old in 1997, my dad came home from work and swore that he saw Bigfoot just north of Antlers. Okay, on us 271, although I knew my dad was not someone who lied. I believed for decades that he was simply telling a funny story, that he may have been tired from driving, or that he might have encountered a person in a Bigfoot costume. It didn't matter who he talked to, but when a topic that related to Bigfoot came up, it was the most anticipated conversation in his life. He maintained until his death in 2018 that he knew with 100% certainty that it could not have been human due to the significant distance between the steps when it walked. I always try to share his story and have recently talked to a guy who also swears to have seen Bigfoot just a little further north than where my dad claimed to have seen it. I felt it was important to share his experience, which I initially doubted, and to find out if anyone in Oklahoma has had encounters in that area or nearby. My teacher told me that his Tibetan friend had an encounter with a Yeti a few years ago. My teacher, who has now left school, told me a story before we broke up for Easter about how his Tibetan friend from a few years ago went back to visit his family and saw a Yeti moving away from him in an open, uphill area. He told me that his friend's father was a firm Yeti skeptic who absolutely did not believe in its existence, and that the local dialect in that region has since evolved to translate Yeti as white man's lie due to the overwhelming number of Western tourists who come to the Himalayas in search of an entity that even the locals no longer believe in. The most prominent details of the encounter, there weren't a lot of details on how the encounter started/ended, because it's difficult for him to remember that long ago were based in these three main details. The animal was at least 7 feet tall. It had to be. It was always upright the entire time and never broke down on all fours like a bear. It walked flawlessly with no struggle. The animal was brown to gray in colorization and had actual hair. His friend claimed that hair ran down its head and then over the rest of its body, and he was absolutely certain that it was not fur. It was definitely hair like a person. According to him, the animal, and this is the most prominent and important detail for me, had a conical or pointy-shaped head. It had what looked like a crest or hump on the structure of its skull, like a gorilla or great ape in general. The figure was facing away from him, and I don't know how long the encounter lasted, but he never saw any facial features or anything. But his Tibetan friend is absolutely convinced that what he saw is what Western people claim to be the Yeti. Visiting his family in Tibet was a massive struggle, especially after China's annexation and complete takeover of the province. He himself was also a Yeti skeptic and, like his father, does not believe in its existence. But he is absolutely convinced that what he saw was not a bear. He believes that he encountered the actual or real Yeti that people base their folklore off. He doesn't believe in the legend or theory of the Yeti, but believes it's based on an actual rare animal like the one he encountered. I think his best guess was that it was an undiscovered ape species that was just so rare and few in number that people haven't been able to pinpoint or declare its existence. Again, this is just an interesting story my teacher told me because he knew I was interested in this stuff, and his Tibetan friend has absolutely no reason to lie about this story. He already said he didn't believe in the Yeti or Bigfoot, so he had absolutely nothing to gain by telling him this. This is a real story that just happened to my best friend and me. I am literally losing sleep over it. My friend and I are still trying to process exactly what we saw the other day. We've talked it through countless times, trying to logically figure out how this was possible. Hopefully someone on here can give us some thoughts and ideas as to what actually happened. So I recently purchased a small bass boat and my first mate leg of, and I have been super eager to explore the lake and its islands as well as learn the fishing around it. We're new to Tennessee. Yesterday, on the 4th of July, we chose to go fishing in a secluded part of the lake, which we named No Man's Land due to the low-hanging bridge that prevents boaters from entering the section. My boat can make it underneath because of how small it is, but I've never seen another boat in there. We decided to go deeper into the cove than we've ever been before. As we're slowly trolling down the lake, the path before us splits into 3 forks, and I ask which fork we should take. Legoff immediately says, the middle one, so we continue straight, as the water changes from a large lake to a narrow river-like path. This is where a chain of events happened in quick succession, and we've talked through it after the fact to try and recall the order of how this went down. First, we heard a weird vocal-like noise coming from the woods beyond the shoreline, and we both tensed up and felt very uneasy. What was that? Legov asked. A dog, I said, as that was the first thing that came to mind. I don't think that was a dog, Legov answered immediately. Then we saw a bird high above us, perching on a branch, staring at us. Maybe it was that bird, Legov said. Yeah, maybe, I answered. I'm not sure when it got into my hand, but at some point I drew my pistol and held it down at my side. Legov held the fishing bow. We both had a very weird feeling as we drifted down the river, eyes glued to the bank. We came to a rotting pine tree that had fallen and was now half submerged in the water, sitting on the shoreline. Then it happened. We hear a very loud, heavy-footed animal running through the woods, getting closer to the water. Initially, I thought the sound was from a deer because it seemed to be prancing, but as it got closer and louder, we both realized it was not a deer at all. It was a very large jet-black canine. My brain thought, oh, it must be a coyote, but this was much bigger, like a huge German shepherd, and it was fast, like a black shadow leaping through the trees and quickly approaching the bank that we were floating across from. It didn't seem to have any texture and details, though, almost like it was flat and blurry. We couldn't see fur or its face and eyes, just the outline of its body and tall wolf-like ears. But it was obviously the body of a canine. Adrenaline started rushing through us, and my brain raced, thinking we were about to have to defend ourselves. It almost looked as if it were charging at us, but it was zigzagging and dodging through the trees toward the exact portion of shoreline we were floating past. We were scared, but the 15 feet of water between our boat and the shoreline gave us some confidence. It would have to swim out to us, and I didn't see that as likely. It continued its leaping through the woods and quickly reached our portion of the shoreline. In one majestic fluid motion, it leapt off the shore and dived into the water right under the half-submerged pine tree in front of us. Stomp, 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 splash. That was it. We held our breath as we waited to hear it swim or move toward us. Small ripples reached our boat from the splash. After the fact, Legov swears the splash should have been much bigger for a creature that size. Watch for it to come back up, I whispered. I had never heard of canines being able to submerge themselves underwater, but here it was happening right in front of our eyes. We waited, nothing. Silence. Just the subtle sound of the ripples it made, slowly dissipating. We waited about 20 more seconds and still nothing. It was almost as if the entire forest had shut off. Silence. Our eyes were glued to the fallen pine tree it dove under. Maybe it's just standing in the water under the tree, Legov says. We muster the courage to move the boat a little closer to inspect the tree. But we find nothing. No sign of anything. At this point, we're in complete shock, stunned. It's gone. How could it be gone? How does something that big just vanish? Especially a huge creature like that. After 30 more seconds of silence, Legov breaks it with, "You saw what I saw, right?" A shiver flashes down my spine. "All of it," I reply. "Really, though? What the F was that?" Legov said. I replied, "I think we saw a demon," and we both nervously laughed. We stay floating near the shoreline in shock for at least another 10 minutes, hoping for a sign that we weren't crazy. Legov scoured the waters, looking to see if they would come up for air. It never did. How the hell could a big black wolf-like creature disappear into thin air, or water for that matter? Being skeptics, we believe there has to be a logical explanation to what we saw, but we can't find one. If it had just splashed the water and gotten out again, 1, we would have seen it walk away in whatever direction, and 2, we would have heard it as anything putting weight on the leaves makes a loud noise, but it was just silence, the loudest of silences. We reside in Middle Tennessee, which may be of assistance. We're still a little shaken up by this. This is 100% true. We are not bullshitting you. Any insight would be much appreciated. Weird cryptid bird-like encounter location near Murmansk, Siberia. Russia, summer 1995, 8:3 p.m. 2 men were riding in a car on a local road outside of Murmansk. Despite it being evening, it was still light out. The road was about 4 meters wide on asphalt and surrounded by fields of tall canes on both sides. The road was straight, and there was excellent visibility. Suddenly, a strange creature appeared running across the road about 15 to 20 meters in front of the car. The creature looked bird-like, and it was visibly huge. The entity had long legs, about 2 meters long, dark feathers along the back, and an odd-shaped back and body. Unfortunately, the witnesses were unable to see any additional details, but discerned that the strange bird was similar to a running reptile. They stopped the car, but realized that it was useless to look for the strange entity amid the dense cane fields. Later, one of the witnesses, while reading a book on dinosaurs, found a picture that depicted almost exactly what he and his friend had seen. The image was later identified as a dinosaur from the order of Ornithischia. Local naturalists stated that no species of animals fitting the description lived in the region. Here is an encounter story of mine that happened in 2019 or so, my real Georgia Bigfoot encounter. I was in the mountains that have a blue-colored mist on them, and I was in a cabin with my mom. We had been to a Bigfoot museum earlier that day. It started at midnight. My mother woke me up, saying something strange was making noise, but I heard it, believe me if you want. But what came next was similar to the story of those 4 to 5 gold miners, with the most famous of stories being the Ape Canyon story. But before anything happened, the creature was whooping, and I responded in kind. We went back and forth 4 times. At 3 a.m., I saw someone or something with yellow or red eyes. It was hard to tell at the time, but it was looking at me, and then a rock hit the window, which was reinforced, and the eyes were next to a tree that I knew was more than 50 feet tall. It was a tall pine tree, and this thing was standing close to 7 to 8 feet tall. It was horrifying. Then I grabbed an air rifle made for hunting squirrels, and no, I don't know what brand it was. This happened in 2019, before COVID. I do know it was able to kill small game, like a .22 can, but the creature got shot by the lead pellet at a high pressure, and I heard a scream and running away, and then I ran inside and looked at the steel door and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. We left the next day after. I think I saw a bog monster 4 years ago, okay? So I live in a nice little seaside town in Canada that has many of these little swamps/bogs in certain parts of town. Usually not a lot goes on in these bogs, as you can't really build in them, and there's not a lot that lives in them except for maybe some frogs and muskrats. Anyways, one Friday night about 4 years ago, I decided to take a break from my university studies and go for some drinks at the local bar with some of the boys. It was a really good night with lots of drinking to be had, and around a bit after 3 in the morning, I decided to start walking home, as I only live about 15 minutes away. I was about halfway home when I noticed something unusual at one of these bogs. From what I could see, it seemed like some kind of light was coming from the water. At first, I simply told myself it was probably just my drunk mind playing tricks on me, but alas, curiosity, with help of some liquid courage, got the best of me, and I decided to approach the light. It is what I saw then that I still, to this day, cannot make sense of. What appeared to be a giant slug/leech-looking creature started to crawl out of the bog with what seemed like 2 very muscular front arms. As it crawled out further, I got a better glimpse of its body, approximately 5 to 6 feet long and about 3 feet tall. I did not seem to have any hind legs, just its front arms, but it did seem to have a slimy underside as it moved quite fast and left behind a somewhat noticeable slime layer. The bioluminescence was coming from a massive bulge located on his forehead and extended down his spinal column. I was completely stunned by what I was seeing and could not move as my body went completely numb. At first, the creature clearly did not notice me, as he was headed in a direction perpendicular to mine. I assume that because he did not initially see me, the creature may not have great eyesight or any eyes at all. It must also have had a poor sense of smell, as it was not drawn to me. It was only when I let out a foolish and loud, "What the F is this thing?" Did the abomination stop dead in its tracks and turn its hideous head at me? At this point, I could clearly see its two large black eyes opening up from its eyelids and staring directly at me. As soon as it saw me, its bioluminescence went out, and I was left blinded in the pitch black. I heard a horrific screech, almost like a bird squawk, but much lower and sounding like it came from deep in the gut. I could hear the creature start to charge at me, as I could hear its large body cut through that tall bog grass. My fight-or-flight instincts kicked in, and you can be damn sure I chose flight. I picked out the nearest street lamp and ran as fast as I could through the grass until I got to it. When I got back to the street, I was surprised to see no sign of the creature behind me. I'm unsure if it wanted to harm me or just scare me out of its bog, as I had seen it moving at an alarming rate as it initially left the bog water. Surely it could have caught a drunk, staggering 2-year-old man. I went home after that and vowed never to go back to the bog. After I finished my degree, I moved to Toronto and haven't been back since. I still can't come to terms with what I saw that night, and I'm not sure I want to. I'm sharing this now to relieve myself and to see if anyone else has had a similar experience or can help me understand it. A hellish creature in Amish country. In August 1973, an ungodly-looking creature created havoc among the God-fearing Amish community of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Witnesses described the creature as the following: the size of a good heifer, gray in color with a white mane. It had tiger-like fangs and curved horns like a billy goat. It ran upright on long legs and had long grisly claws. In one incident, the creature sent a team of horses and 2 brothers flying when it approached their hay wagon. The following day, a man was cutting weeds on his farm about 5 miles from the previous incident when he heard a fierce roar and turned to see a monster with 3 horns and a tail charging in his direction. He raised his scythe to defend himself, only to have the implement ripped from his hands. At that point, the man wisely decided to turn both cheeks to the monster and escaped as fast as he could run. A day later, a woman was feeding poultry on a farm, midway between the 2 earlier incidents, when she heard a commotion and turned to see the creature in the act of snatching a goose in each of its hands. She bravely ran toward the thing, waving her apron. The woman managed to recover one of her geese when the creature threw it at her, knocking her to the ground in the process. The interloper then escaped with the remaining bird in hand. I think I messed up. For context, I live on tribe land. I'm not a tribal member, though, flush against the Olympic National Forest in the Pacific Northwest. I was taking my dogs out for an evening potty walk. They are husky puppies, and I had them on their leashes as they tend to prefer exploring freely. They did their business and sniffed around, leading me on the dirt road that goes around my property. And as we near the portion of the road that goes along the edge of the woods, in the moonlight, I could just barely see that something had slowly started to come out of the tree line and was making its way towards us. This is about 300 feet from my house, 100 feet from the actual tree line in that part of my property adjacent to the woods. The space there is mostly Scots broom and other foliage with some small trees. So I hastily brought my dogs back inside my house, grabbed my shotgun and headlamp, and went back out to check out what it was I saw. I went out along the dirt road and made it to the portion that is only about 50 feet from the tree line. About 30 feet into that space between the edge of the property and the tree line, I saw 3 sets of reflecting eyes among the foliage that I assumed belonged to deer. They all 3 looked up towards me, and after a moment 2 of them started to walk away towards the tree line, while the last just sat there unmoving, staring directly at my light. I whistled at it. Despite folklore warnings that this is an invitation for different evils, and almost immediately the eyes went up about 3 or 4 feet higher than they were when they first started staring at me, as if whatever it was had stood up on its hind legs. This immediately spooked me, and I backpedaled back directly towards my house through my yard, keeping my eyes and headlamp spotlight on it, only periodically looking back to keep myself from tripping over any loose branches or objects in my yard. Those eyes didn't move or go down to where they had been previously. It just stood almost perfectly still and watched me the entire way back to my house. This happened earlier tonight, and I haven't been able to get myself to relax or sleep whatsoever since. I feel paranoid, just sitting here listening for noises and periodically going to my living room window to look towards the woods with my infrared monocular. Typically, my belief in cryptids has mostly been just as folklore, but the immediate terror I felt when that happened just doesn't feel natural. I've hunted deer, elk, bear, and cougars, and I can't think of an explanation that makes any sense for what I saw. Help me find this mystery creature from my childhood. It is very important to note that my brother has never touched any drugs or alcohol. The hardest substance he had ever consumed was 3 medicine cups of Nuquil, which he took while he had COVID. Even 11 years later, he experienced such weird dreams from it that he said he would never try anything else. My brother and I are trying to identify the creatures that occasionally appeared at our old house and outside his workplace. We live in Southwest Virginia, right near the border of WV and NC. There were apparently figures that looked human, but when the streetlights illuminated them, they appeared to have no faces. My brother worked in a gas station, so the parking lot had a lot of lights and poles for it to hide behind. That's where he'd see it the most. In our backyard, we had like a street lamp type of pole in our yard that was the orangish glowing type, not the white like the sidewalk street lamps, if that makes sense. My house I currently live in has one in the backyard, so it's at least common in my area. However, the figures I saw were different each time, and they all appeared to be normal people until they peeked their heads from behind the poles, at which point the lights illuminated their faces. We've looked up all we could, and the closest we could find was a Japanese legend, or the hide behind, which is more commonly described as more Bigfoot or dog-like than being legit people with no faces. Legend of Woolly Swamp. May know the story told in the Charlie Daniels song Legend of Woolly Swamp? Well, you may be surprised he's from this little town I call home. So you can imagine that these creepy woods around here influenced his music. One is the aforementioned song. He even mentions Carver's Creek in it if you listen. That's an old creek that used to be a popular fishing hole about 12 miles west of Elizabethtown. Woolly Swamp is where the creek feeds in. It has been said that many moonshiners called the old swamp home. That's where they made their spirits. And some, like Lucius Clay, are said to have left them right there. Most of those old moonshiners like to bury their money in mason jars so the law wouldn't get their stash, and neither would some of the more desperate people looking to make a quick buck. If you listen to the song, it will tell you the rest. The truth is that old man still walks that swamp, protecting his still and his money. The old man himself sat down one evening after we had been out hunting and told me the story of where that song came from. Charlie very much loved to hunt, and he came down every year to bag him a buck or two. This is what he told me. The song came from a story he was told as a child. As he grew older, he believed the story was meant to prevent children from wandering into the swamp and encountering a moonshiner or possibly an alligator. So he got bold, and he and a few of his friends went out one night looking. There was an old shack back up in the woods where Lucius lived. And they knew where it was, so with some liquor and flashlights, they went to see if the old man would come around. You have to go when the moon is full, he also told me. Lucius walked when the full moon was out. That's when he liked to dig up his money. I held on to every word while Charlie spoke. He could tell a story and keep you glued better than any TV could. We went out there, sat around, even built a little fire and broke out the bottle of Jack. We must have been out there for a while, just having a good old time. When we noticed that the fire had turned blue and it was getting pretty damn cold, we didn't like that the fire had gone out. There had been flames 3 feet high, but they were blue flames like those you'd see burning off a good jar of moonshine. Hell, I could run my hand through the flames and they were cold to the touch. That's when we noticed we had one more fellow sitting with us than what we came with. The old man was sitting right there and had a gaze locked on every one of us. He took that bottle of Jack and turned it up and said, "So you boys come for my money or my shine?" Charlie said the woods got real dark and you could hear screams coming from all around them. The old man said, "They came for my money and shine, but the gators got them now." Charlie said he let out a laugh that made your hair turn white, and that's all they needed to see. Charlie said they got out of there so fast he didn't even know if they left anyone until they got to the end of the road. He said he looked over and Lucius was still sitting beside him in the truck laughing. He said Lucius told him not to ever come back down there or the gators would have him next time, and then he vanished. They never went back to Woolly Swamp. In fact, to his last days, Charlie wouldn't hunt around that swamp. Charlie told me Lucius was the damn devil, and I best not go around there if I didn't want to meet him or those gators. I took his warning to heart and never went in there. I can't deny that Charlie's story made me curious. Oh, I ventured down that way a few times. On a full moon night, parking your car in the right spot down there allows you to hear Lucius laughing in the woods and the distant screams of those who never made it back out. If you venture in there, you might run across an old shack and see where there was a campfire, and when you do, I hope you go ahead and run out of there pretty quick. Lucius still has his money hidden out there, and he aims to keep it. Like I told you, those woods hide many dark secrets. Charlie didn't believe it, and he had to see it for himself. He said it best, there are just some things in this world you just can't explain. I saw some weird-looking thing about 10 years ago in Henderson County, North Carolina. While walking in the woods, there were 2 other witnesses. My dog followed it and never came back as well. I wish I had pictures, but it was as big as a black bear and it crossed about 15 feet in front of us. The craziest part was that it was in a pretty cleared-out area of the woods, but it just appeared from nowhere. It made no sounds either. My description of the thing is that it was black in color and had ears long like a rabbit. It ran hunched over, but only on its back legs, left no marks and made no sounds. Scared the shit out of my sister, her boyfriend at the time, and me. I can still recall the exact place we were standing when it happened. I've never heard of a cryptid-like creature that meets the description, though. Always bugged me, even years later. This happened to me about 3 years ago, and to this day I don't know what I saw. I always figured it was a weird-looking animal, but no, it was definitely humanoid. I hope no one here thinks I'm crazy because of where it happened, considering how many people are around. But ever since this encounter, I never ever hang around natural parks or semi-natural places where you have to put up your high beams at night. I get the feeling I am being watched. Anyways, this happened near the Santa Monica Mountains, near Los Angeles or Malibu. I kept bugging my boyfriend at the time that I wanted to see shooting stars, late summertime BTW. And obviously living in LA, it's always well full of smog and light pollution. You have to drive a minimum of 2 hours to find a good spot, but we wanted to stay near, and so we picked those mountains, nice reviews. And I've been there before, no problem. I wasn't the only one who wanted to see shooting stars. There was a meteor shower, and near the park's entrance, some people had already set up their telescopes. My dumbass introverted idea was, let's go past these people so we can be alone. It was dumb, yes, past the parking lot and pretty much looked like a trail. Anyways, he agreed and we picked a lonely spot. We did see another couple stay near, but that was it. The walk was less than a mile to the spot we were at, and the couple disappeared towards some rock formation nearby. I laid my blanket down. The meteor shower did not disappoint. but my hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up, goosebumps, and I felt like I was being watched. I turned around and nothing. My boyfriend kept telling me to calm down, that I was just imagining things, especially because we basically illegally parked, just like everyone else. I did not want my car impounded, so he excused it as my paranoia, but it felt like we were being stalked, and I just had the most horrible feeling. We were legit sitting for a max of 10 minutes, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I said I wanted to go home because something was indeed watching us, a single coyote. Now, coyotes are small animals that typically hunt in packs, but this one was alone. It went into a bush, and although I lost sight of it, that horrible feeling remained. Meanwhile, my boyfriend kept cracking jokes, saying I was just paranoid and afraid of a little coyote, but I respectfully told him that I do not want to be bitten. I started speed walking towards the car, and my boyfriend kept making fun of me, asking me to slow down, and I turned around. This is when I caught a glimpse of it. As I walked towards the spot, I noticed street lamps along the trail, and the creature was avoiding the light, but next to it was the coyote from earlier, which had stopped. That thing was hyper-fixated, its face smushed into the ground where I was standing earlier. I didn't have a good glimpse of it until it stood under a light and turned to its side, and I felt dread. I wanted to start running. But with flip-flops, I was definitely going to eat shit, and, well, my boyfriend wasn't helping. He started calling this thing out, saying it was a dog or a messed-up coyote. But once it stood under the light, his laughter disappeared. I did also notice something in the night. You hear well crickets and bugs, but when this coyote and thing appeared, there was silence. I knew something was off. I was able to compare this creature to a coyote. It was way bigger, I don't even know how it hid, that is how big it was, than the coyote. No fur and gray or pale skin, and it looked well like a human bent down on all fours, but some details were off. For one, it had no snout, but from what I could make out, was bald with no ears, nothing like a coyote, not even a malnourished one. It looked human, but not really. It had weird legs like a dog or a cat, and the fingers were abnormally huge, skinny, long fingers with huge back spine bones sticking out in a stomach, so tucked it looked like a hungry dog's. It started to follow us with its face smushed into the ground and quickly walking towards us. We started to jog, trying to be quiet, and I was trying hard not to cry because that thing looked like a Pan's Labyrinth monster. That's the closest thing I can compare it to, so you guys can have a slight idea. Once we saw cop cars kicking people out from the area, I was relieved. We got into my car and did not speak the whole ride back. We had nightmares about that thing for a week straight. I told my brothers and family about the encounter. Some said it was a Nwal, a witch from my culture that transforms into animals, while others referred to it as a skinwalker or nightcrawler. All I know is I am never, ever going out at night into wilderness parks, especially with someone with the survival skills of a turnip. Every time I am out at a natural park with friends or family for a trip or a hike, I occasionally catch a glimpse of a coyote staring at me, and for my own safety, I just stopped going altogether to avoid trouble. Wolf-like creature. Something that crosses my mind every once in a while is a weird experience I had as a child. I must have been 8 to 11 when I was talking to my friend in our apartment complex in broad daylight and saw a huge animal that resembled a wolf, but much, much bigger, in Tacoma, Washington. Year? I'd say maybe between 2009 and 2011. I knew it wasn't normal. In fact, I stood there shocked the whole time I saw it. It was staring at me, like it wanted me to see it. It's almost as if it had something to tell me and was trying to communicate with me. I had a feeling it didn't want me to be scared, and I wasn't, just in complete shock as I locked eyes with it. All it did was slowly walk by until it disappeared around the corner. I would say it was maybe 5 feet in height, Very large, but not with too much visible muscle. Pitch black, with bright yellow or red eyes. If you've watched Twilight, it looked very similar to that size/body. I don't think it's a dogman, as its body didn't look human-like to me or hunched, but also it was so long ago I can hardly remember details. It was walking on 4 legs, not 2. I remember when I finally snapped out of it, I struggled to tell my friend what I just saw as she had her back turned from the direction I saw it. I gathered all my friends in the complex so we could go look for it, but found nothing. It's bothered me ever since. I have a weird feeling as if I had a connection to this creature and just want to know what it could have been. Sharing my story. New here, but with everything that's going on. About time I shared some of my experiences. There's a resort near Lake Powell called Amandri. It's a bit more upscale. So the cultural influences felt more authentic as local tribe members often showed us the mesa's hikes and other attractions. One of the local guides who became our friend took us everywhere and shared all sorts of stories with us. There were these beautiful caves that we were not allowed to enter because he warned us that dangerous creatures lived there. When I would pry into which kind, I asked mountain lions. No, we have guns to protect us from those. And I was left stumped a few days later. There was an eclipse for reference. It was from the second week of January to maybe early February 2019 when I went. I was out by the pool viewing as they had shut the lights off and there were few guests because it was the off-season. My friend went back to the room to grab another blanket. I was getting excited as it was getting closer and closer to the peak of the eclipse. I thought I saw him coming through the slats in the fence around the area I was in. I saw what looked to be a tallish guy who was slightly hunched forward and had a light by the head area. I thought maybe my friend was on the phone and wrapped in a blanket, which was normal for him. I ran around the corner to tell the figure to hurry up, but it had disappeared. Little confused, but hey, the lights were dimmed if not off, and I was excited, so I brushed it off. We were in a car to drive to our next activity the following day with our buddy I mentioned prior. I hadn't told my friend yet because he's a coward, so I told him my story, and our buddy looks back at me. He tells me about the Skinwalkers, how they sell their souls, and I was lucky to have seen one and been okay, etc. The first time I ever heard of these was as I lived on the coast. In summary, our trip comes to an end, and on the last day, while we are packing the car, our buddy finds me. He gives me a dream catcher, some tea, and some feathers. I emphasize gives me as I didn't have to pay, and tells me to stay safe. Nothing too serious, but something rubbed me the wrong way, and I trust my gut too much. Something ran at me in the woods. My uncle's family has land in western Illinois next to the Rock River and the Mississippi River. Their house is in the farm-filled countryside a bit and has a pond in the backyard with maybe 10 to 15 acres of woods. I know people in the area that have refused to go in those woods due to bad feelings and negative energy. My uncle and I never cared about that, though, so I'll explain our experiences now and hope someone can give some kind of insight. In 2020, when COVID hit, he and I decided to make a little shelter by the pond on the outskirts of the woods. It was mid-July, and the weather was lovely. We camped outside for 2 weeks straight. We cooked our food with the fires we made, built our little home, created games to pass the time, and did everything we could. It was a great time, and I had no fears or cares in the world. I've spent a lot of time outside, and so I know the animals and wildlife decently well. We had planned to be out there for 4 weeks in total, but our adventure ended quicker than expected. One of our last days out there, I was sent to get more sticks for the fires. It was still light outside, but the sun was starting to go down. I'd done this many times before, and I knew the best places to look. To enter the woods, you have to walk around the back of the pond and enter a tiny path on the farthest left. There's a flimsy wired fence along that side that blocks the neighbor's property line, As you walk in, the path goes uphill for most of the way, and then the fence wraps through the middle of the woods, extending all the way to the rightmost part before coming back down. I walked until I reached the fence in the middle and then followed it to the right, as I was aware of the large trees located in that direction. The fence is extremely old, and most of the trees have grown fully through it. I was enjoying the greenery and humming to myself. It was peaceful. I then found a nice spot on the right side of the woods, maybe 15 to 20 feet from the fence, and started looking for sticks and logs. As I was doing this, it got uncomfortably quiet. There was usually some type of sound, such as frogs, birds, or insects, yet not a sound. My ears perked up and I listened more intently. My body felt strange, as if I were the center of attention, like something was watching me. I turned around and looked at the fence, focusing on this large tree grown through it. I'm not sure why, it's just where my eyes fixated. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just waiting and listening. Everything felt wrong. And then I heard it. It was 4 steps, like stumps, something running on 2 feet. But it shook the ground, it filled my ears and head. It was so loud. My first thought was an elephant, but it was right there, right behind that tree. I felt my entire body freeze in absolute terror. I cannot explain to you how loud it was. It shook the ground. It was running toward me, yet there was nothing there. I could feel almost its anger at me. Like I said, I was frozen, and so it took me maybe another 3 to 5 minutes before I had the courage to run back along the fence. Once I got back to our campsite, I told my uncle I had heard something out there and it tried to get me, to which he replied, "Oh, you met Gerald? Let me explain now what he told me." Before I had told him what I heard, he said it was named Gerald, and told me a story from a few years prior when he and a friend were on the right side of the woods, except on the outskirts, not inside like I was. I'll try and sum it up for time's sake. It was dark outside, and he and his friend were trying to film goofy videos. Everything became quiet, and they felt anxious, although they were unsure of the reason. It was just a bodily reaction. They listened for anything they could, staring into the darkness of the trees when they heard 4 steps on 2 feet running at them, and they booked it. He said it was so close to them. It felt like he was right there about to get them, but they didn't wait to find out. I was now terrified because he shared this information with me before I revealed my own experience, and it aligned perfectly with what I had gone through. Yet, being the young, stupid teen I was, I felt fearless and confident. So after the sun went down, I grabbed a flashlight and trekked back up into the woods. This time I didn't make it past the left side. I entered and walked along the fence, stopping when it turned at the midpoint of the woods. The feeling was immediately back, draining all confidence. I stared past the fence into the trees. I didn't see anything, but I knew it was there. A stick broke to my left. I turned left to see nothing, and I turned back, and I saw it. It was 50 feet at least away, sitting in the branch of a tree, watching me. It wasn't an owl. I've seen so many owls out there. Its eyes were big like one, but the glow coming from it wasn't the eyes, it was behind the eyes, like in the skull. And I could see a long, mangled body in the branch with it, like a shadow. We just stared at each other. I was frozen, knowing I was about to die. Everything felt numb. After a few minutes, or maybe seconds, I couldn't tell, a stick cracked my left again, so I quickly checked, but there was nothing there. I looked back, and it was gone. I started yelling at the top of my lungs for my uncle to come get me, and he kept calling me stupid, but did. I couldn't turn my back to it, though, so I walked backwards with him leading me until we made it out of the woods. He sat me down and gave me a talking to, saying not to do that again and that it's not something to mess with. I know this story sounds so stupid and childish, but it's not. Whenever I see woods, I feel anxious and I can't even look at his property. I know what I heard and saw as well as what we heard, but I have no idea what to think, even years later. Four-eyed hairy monsters location/date, Paggio, Umbriccio, Italy. The 28th of July, 1999. 6:3 a.m. Two teenage brothers, Giacomo and Alfio, were collecting mushrooms in a pine grove near their home when a loud rustling sound attracted their attention to some nearby trees. They stood looking at the spot where the noise had originated from and waited in total silence for about 15 minutes. Suddenly, they heard loud grunting sounds coming from the brush. Curious, both boys walked toward the brush to see what was making the strange sounds. Suddenly, out of the brush stepped a bizarre creature covered in dark black hair, about 1.5 meters in height, with an oblong-shaped face with 4 eyes, 2 on top and 2 closer to a snout-like nose. It had normal hairless ears and what appeared to be 5 clawed legs. The creature stared at the boys with a malevolent gaze full of hate. As both watched in horror, 4 other similar creatures walked out of the woods. Both witnesses fled the area in a panic. Later they debated whether to notify local authorities, but they decided against it. I used to live in and own a cabin in Willow Creek, California in 2018. I live just a short walk away from the Trinity River, which is near the border of Hoopa, California. I had access to private land that no one had been on in months except for me, my then girlfriend, and her daughter. We went everywhere together, never apart, especially when living up in Humboldt County. One day we were walking back from taking her daughter down to the Trinity River in late November 2018 and happened upon what can best be described as 2 Sasquatch footprints. They were huge, at least 2 times bigger in width and length than my 10.511 size shoe. They were shaped like a barefoot man, and they were very deeply embedded in the hard ground. I weighed about 215 to 225 pounds at the time, stomped my foot on the ground next to one of the prints as hard as I could, and my foot barely made an indentation. From this, I gather the creature must have weighed 800 to 1,000 pounds. My then-girlfriend captured a photograph of the print. However, as I recall, the image did not appear as convincing as the actual print did in person. She still possesses the photo, although I hope she does. I never felt the urge to present the photo due to fear of ridicule, but I know what I saw. I am familiar with wild animal prints, and never in my near 40 years of life have I ever seen such prints as these. Seeing them was like seeing a UFO. They really stood out. Willow Creek is abundant with huckleberry bushes, which are actually a dense and fast-growing plant that thrives during specific times of the year. I have heard many witness testimonies that claim Sasquatch not only eat huckleberries, but also somehow can create a space inside of the big bushes and use it for shelter/camouflage. I have a really good friend who is a logger in Humboldt County, and I badgered him for years about Sasquatch. He wouldn't tell me yes or no. Finally, one day he called me on a video chat from Hyperion. Hyperion is the tallest tree in the world, and he knows the location, although the location is not publicly shared, so as to preserve the tree on that day. He finally admitted about Sasquatch. Yeah, they're real. They're really rare, but they're real. They have huge ranges that they forage throughout the year and are almost always on the move from one place to another. He grew up in Alaska and Idaho as the son of a trapper/hunter and is as much of an outdoorsman as one could be, a very skilled climber too. He then showed me on one of the massive trees these scratch marks that were about 20 feet up and indicated to me that they were left by a Sasquatch. He went into detail as to how they differed from a mountain lions or any other animals, but I don't really remember all the terminology/talking points on that one. This guy is as serious as a heart attack, and it took me years of close friendship with him before he'd actually admit it. But he did. I was satisfied with his admission alone. Another thing I can confirm is how matter-of-fact and unimpressed most locals in that area are about the reality of Sasquatch. The reason loggers keep quiet about it is because they don't want to lose their jobs should Sasquatch's ranges be declared protected habitat and thus destroy the logging industry. Everyone else I encountered while living in Willow Creek was quite nonchalant about the existence of Sasquatch, often regarding me as if to say, "Of course it's real." Of course it's real in a very mild-mannered way, and I would just sort of shrug it off. There is a Sasquatch museum in the heart of Willow Creek that is also known as the China Flats Museum. There is a huge redwood tree trunk that was carved into a giant Sasquatch in front of the museum and stands about 20 tall. For the entire time I lived there, I never saw the museum actually open. There are other Sasquatch statues in that town, the Bigfoot Motel, where the Patterson-Gimlin film first debuted, and beautiful Sasquatch murals on some of the buildings in town, as well as a Bigfoot golf course, if I recall correctly. Lastly, I became friends with a Hoopa native. Willow Creek used to also be a part of Hoopa, California. Back in the day, I held a clubhouse room one night to try and convince one of my best friends that Sasquatch was real, and I titled it as Sasquatch Real. The Hoopa friend of mine, named Thomas, joined the room and told everyone in it that Sasquatch was indeed real, that their people had known about it for generations, that he lived along the Trinity River and would see prints just like I did, and that they encounter Sasquatch sometimes when they go hunting. He said the way they deal with them in the woods is to wave their arms and exclaim, "We aren't here to hurt you," and proceed to walk the other way. He said, "We leave them alone, they leave us alone." My people have followed this approach for many generations. My friend, once a disbeliever, was blown away by my Hoopa friend's admission in the clubhouse room and has been a believer ever since. I also camped one night up near Cave Junction, Oregon, and heard the whoops and tree knocks all night. It scared the crap out of me. I learned then of the sense of dread that so many other witnesses report. The feeling was indeed a unique sense of horrifying dread that's hard to explain. In those dark woods at night, it feels like they're all watching you and could grab you at any moment. I have a few more stories, but I need to continue with my day. A friend of mine from the Midwest encountered Momo the Monster down at the Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri in the early to mid-2000s. It was standing in front of her lake house when she got home from a party one night with her friends. She said it had no neck and was shaped like a square, was so wide. She thought it was an alien at the time she saw it, thinking Bigfoot only looked like the traditional patty type. She said it stared at her and her friend from about 50 to 100 feet away, and they were terrified. They kept slipping down into their car seats and would pick up every now and again to see if it was still there. It was still there after they did this a few times, but after the fourth or fifth time, they said it was gone. I remember her recounting the story to me, and you could visibly see the fear in her face and hear it in her voice as she told it. Creature on the other side of the river. I don't know if this is a scary story or not, but to me it felt scary. There was this one time when I bicycled to a certain beach in October some years ago. It was mildly below 0 degrees Celsius and the ground was frozen that day. It was roughly a bit over 14 kilometers from my home to that beach where I often go to watch the sea. It is usually a really empty place, and compared to the other beaches in my hometown, it is the largest. After going there, on the left side, there is a river that ends at the sea. On the other side of the river, usually there is a place where cows can be seen during the summer, but that day there was something else. I remember going to look at it. It was brown, and it stood. At first I was a bit confused. Then it went to walk on all fours, and after some time, while I was looking, it started closing in. Luckily, it was quite far away, and I took my leave quickly. I believed that it was a bear, but I haven't seen such before. In that place, I have seen a moose, eagles, a fox, and other kinds of creatures, but not a bear. I'm wondering if I encountered a crawler. 2 years ago, I lived in a small village in Germany with my family. There are a lot of wooded areas nearby. I went on a walk one day. It was already dark out in fall or winter, if that matters. I walked down the main road, through the whole village. There's a football field at the end, with a parking lot in front. When I reached it, I saw a figure in the distance in the parking lot. It looked naked, grayish and pale, standing in the distance, slightly slumped over with its side turned to me. I stared at it for several seconds, and I've never had any clear visual hallucinations. It was also thin. I couldn't tell how tall exactly it was from where I was standing, but it was definitely about the size of an adult human, or taller. After staring for a while, I got into a panic, thinking about what would happen if it saw me, too. So I ended up turning and bolting, ran all the way home, and looked back once. I believe I wasn't followed at all. The Fayetteville River Monster. Over the years, we've heard and read about a variety of cryptid sightings in Fayette County, Pennsylvania, which include a supposed underwater beast in the Cheat River known as the Monster of Seltzer's Hole. The Cheat River is a 78-mile-long tributary of the Monongahela River. The following account appeared in the Philadelphia Times on July 31st, 1893. For months, farmers living near the Line Ferry have been missing sheep, lambs, pigs, and even young calves, not to mention countless chickens, turkeys, and geese, until a few days ago. They had been blaming the Italians and other laborers engaged in grading the state line road for the theft of these animals. Since early last spring, every night a farmer has woken up to find he has been robbed of a fat pig, a young calf, a sheep, 2 or 3 choice lambs, or half a dozen of his finest barnyard fowls. Effort was made to catch the thief, but every attempt proved a failure, and everybody had about settled down to the belief that the laborers along the railroad were doing the stealing. At least 3 of the most reputable farmers in the neighborhood have finally cleared up the mystery in their minds. They will not at present allow their names to be made public, and it was only after assuring the correspondent to keep their names out of print that they told him what they knew about this monster of Seltzer's Hole, as it is called. They saw the monster at different times, but around the same hour, and gave similar descriptions. "I first saw the monster," said one of the farmers just at daybreak last Tuesday morning. "I got up very early to go to Uniontown and started out to the pasture field to get the horses. And just as I opened the barnyard gate, I heard a terrible racket down by the calf pen, which was immediately followed by the stampede of every living object in the barnyard in the direction of the house. The chickens and turkeys flew with loud cries of distress into the trees in the yard, into the roof of the house, and the cattle and pigs crowded around me, trembling with fright and uttering pitiful outcries of terror. Something down at the calf pen had given them a terrible fright, but what it was I could not imagine. But I resolved to find out, and pushing my way through the trembling animals, that this is, the recent and developed